Labas rytas ir good morning once again. It is my great pleasure to start this event, roundtable event, discussion in Vilnius, in Christmas-like Vilnius, on deepening EU integration in view of future enlargement. After yesterday's European Council meeting and events around and decisions made concerning the start of membership negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova in particular, I think probably there are very few who might question how current this issue is. And I'm afraid that we are just in the beginning of the process. Will be a series of such events if we don't change something and we don't reform Ukraine, EU decision-making. So we are bound, to meet those vetoes or different decisions, delay, all right, blockade, every time. Somebody said that Orban can repeat blockage for 70 times. What comes to Ukraine? Since the provisional closure, opening of the chapter, okay, and provisional closure. 70 times. Who wants this circus going on? So that's why, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to start this event. And in fact, I'm very happy we've been able to invite very competent people, experts, dedicated politicians who know those issues by heart, who are not just working, who live by this. So this is an important part of our work, dedication, involvement, because we know we will need to work hand in hand with Ukraine, with those new acceding countries to assist them, to provide them with the much more experience and advice in order to streamline accession process, which is a complicated one, I have to admit. And again, ladies and gentlemen, this event is organized by Renew Europe. It's a very important political group, I have to admit, in the European Parliament. And the Committee of Future of Seimas, the Parliament of Lithuania. And the Roundtable is part of Renew Europe organized exchanges in EU member states to engage citizens on issues relevant to Renew Europe priorities for 2024. And we know what will be in 2024. So that's why I once again want to emphasize that our event is web-streamed with the simultaneous interpretation into 2 languages, Lithuanian and English, all right? And of course, we are looking forward for much greater, closer engagement with people, citizens, to explain those pertaining issues, most complicated ones sometimes, but still bringing some proposals for future solutions. With this in mind, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to invite for a keynote address my friend, colleague, my party leader, Victoria Chmilytė-Nielsen, who is a speaker of this house. Victoria.
Thank you so much, dear Petras, dear colleagues, excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished participants of this conference. It is really a great pleasure to welcome all of you in Seimas today. And let me start by saying congratulations on the good news yesterday. A huge step forward for Ukraine, something that we have been all rooting for Moldova, for Georgia, and a step forward also for Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we are meeting today in a more hopeful and optimistic world than a day before yesterday. So let's build on that. I will switch to Lithuanian, so please take earphones for those who need them, and really good having you all here.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this relevant and timely roundtable discussion on deepening EU integration in view of future enlargement. First of all, I appreciate the fact that this debate is being held in the Lithuanian Seimas, as it highlights the importance of national parliaments in European affairs. In shaping the future of the EU and of the European continent as a whole, it is important that it reflects not only collective decisions but also based on democratic principles. The title of this roundtable gives hope that the future direction for the European Union includes both deepening integration and broadening its scope. The worst-case scenario would be a stagnation of integration and efforts and a halt to enlargement. The EU enlargement is a geopolitical necessity, not a choice. The Lithuanian Seimas was the first national parliament of the European Union to explicitly support Ukraine's EU membership by a separate resolution. We also support the EU membership aspirations of Moldova, Georgia and the Western Balkan countries. Our aim is to ensure a high-quality, reversible and merit-based reform process so that all applicant countries can become full members. There is still a long way to go, but as the title of this roundtable suggests, just as the candidates have to prepare for membership, so must the EU and Lithuania. They all have to prepare for enlargement. I am convinced that Lithuania must be at the heart of the European Union, and for this to happen, we need to actively participate in the integration processes, especially those that benefit our people, our economy, and our security. But just as chess has learned the logic of the sequence of decisions, I am looking for a logical sequence in the EU integration processes. And the sequence, from my point of view, is this. The issues that are the most important to our people should be addressed first. For us, it's the issue of security, and enlargement is directly linked to our long-term security. Therefore, we must first of all start with a clear development process and a firm agreement on its principles. If there's no enlargement, there's no question of reforms as well. Logic, therefore, suggests that those who are the biggest supporters of further EU integration must be also the biggest supporters of the EU enlargement. Second, we must carry out an in-depth assessment and have a deep and structured debate on both the impact of enlargement of the next multi-annual perspective budget and on the necessary reforms or adaptation of existing sectoral policies to the new context. It needs to be done in time to manage potential risks. The focus should be on areas likely to be most affected, such as the common agricultural policy, cohesion, and the single market, and others. Finally, and only if necessary, discussions on institutional issues could take place. For the time being, there should be no need for unnecessary public upheaval and antagonism between member states, especially now that the fate of enlargement is being decided, and especially in the context of the forthcoming EP elections. If there are those who say that we cannot move forward with enlargement without immediate institutional reforms, it is very important to explore the possibility of reforms in the existing treaties, because in the case of the previous enlargements, the Lisbon Treaty worked. I am confident that institutionally the EU is already ready for enlargement, and the EU does not need a treaty change to expand, and institutional reforms should not be presented as a precondition for enlargement or used to postpone it indefinitely. Compared to a train, enlargement should be the locomotive and institutional reforms is the last carriage. I hope we will find a harmonious balance between development and institutional effectiveness solutions, and in finding them it is important to avoid confrontation. The EU has the opportunity to truly become a beacon of stability and democratic values in an ever-changing global context. Thank you. I wish you fruitful discussions.
Thank you, Victoria, for your great keynote address. So now we will organize for a first session. Justinas will take care of, he's in charge of the first session. Maybe, Justinas, you have to move here.
I'm happy to meet you. All right. I hope everybody can hear me. And above all, I hope that all of our speakers, those here present and those remote, are here. I'm Justinas Mickas. I'm a senior policy analyst with the government Strategic Analysis Center here in Lithuania. It's an in-house think tank dedicated to strategic planning. And in that capacity, I've been closely following all the debates happening at the EU and the national level on both enlargement and reform. And I'm very, very eager to have this discussion today about how we can combine the two processes of deepening the union and enlarging the union. And I'm incredibly excited that we have such an star-studded, let's say, not being too ambitious, panel today covering multiple perspectives, both national and professional. And I really hope that we will have a productive conversation. Just a brief note on logistics, two brief notes. The first one is that our first speaker will be connecting remotely and is, as I understand, under a severe time limit. So we'll dedicate the first 15 to 20 minutes for their intervention and any follow-up questions we may have. The second brief logistical note is that there is no greater jargon factory than the EU. Its institutional setup, its enlargement processes, etc. And having been to many of these discussions in the past, I saw this good practice that we all commit collectively at the panel to avoid, acronyms, jargon. Nobody knows what the passerelle is. QMV is intuitive to us, not very intuitive to others. I'll try to do my best. I may fail, and I really invite all the speakers as well to, step aside for a second if they go for an acronym and just spell it out. That being said, I hope all is pretty clear, and if all the technical setup is all right, we will welcome the first speaker, who is perhaps one of the brightest and most renowned members of the European Parliament, and has been for a long time leader of the Alliance of Liberal Democrats of Europe, now Renew, and still one of the most outspoken, if not the most outspoken, voices for calling for a much more ambitious European integration, a federal Europe, Guy Verhofstadt. As I said, this is a remote connection, so I hope we can set it up. He's not connected yet. I'm sorry?
In moments.
In moments. I do hope that we shouldn't, lose track and focus on data, or would you prefer if the timeline aligns? Understood. Well, in that case, I do think we have another no less bright star in the European Parliament sitting right next to us. It's Petras Auštrevičius, who is one of the conveners of this event, and I guess has been introduced already. If we expect from Mr. Verhofstadt to discuss a little bit the parliamentary resolution on the treaty reform, Mr. Auštrevičius can introduce us to another very important initiative currently being prepared by the European Parliament, which is a report specifically on the topic of today's conference on deepening integration through enlargement, with a view on enlargement. And I'm very, very interested to hear what is the perceived value out of this report, in addition and on top of all the other documents, proposals on these two topics, and especially how it contributes.
Disconnect. Oh, good.
All right. As you can see, the process is not easy, fitting for the topic of institutional reform and enlargement. Back to Mr. Verhofstadt, and I cannot help but ask, yesterday, as we were all waiting for the council conclusions, I saw on the Politico Live blog that Mr. Verhofstadt sent a letter to his party group saying that he's lost confidence in the Commission President because of the concession made to Viktor Orban. A few minutes later, we heard the positive news on the opening of the accession, and a few more hours later, we heard disappointing news again on the veto of the 50 billion support package for Ukraine. So I wanted to ask, in addition to your comments on the enlargement, on the need of reform, on the EP resolution, was yesterday a Pyrrhic victory? Is it a bittersweet moment? Is it just something expected of the EU as it is today, and doesn't create any cause for increase or decrease of hope? So not to overload your introductory remarks, but I would be very, very interested to hear both the political sentiment and then the parliamentary view on treaty reform. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Maybe everybody can hear me, hopefully. If Petra says yes, it has to be yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for informing me. So I'm still in Strasbourg in the European Parliament, where we have, as you have done, followed the decisions that have been taken by the European Council yesterday. And I think you have made a fair assessment on the issue of opening the negotiations. They found something what is happening in politics regularly, that is that the man who is against the decision goes out of the room. So it's not the first time that this is happening in politics. I have seen it many times in the past. So we can be very pleased with that the accession negotiations can start. On the other hand, as you rightly indicated, on the money, there will be an additional, if I understand it well, an additional meeting of the Council probably in January to try to deblock it. And so if you look to the overall picture, there is a very good lesson to learn for the topic that you are discussing today in the conference, in your conference. That is that already today with 27 and certainly tomorrow with 36 member states, it's impossible to take swift, effective decisions if we don't reform internally, and certainly if we not get rid of unanimity. Because yesterday the decision was positive on accession, but on the three other topics that are linked, the problems are still there. And I'm talking about money, arms, military equipment, and thirdly, on sanctions. On all these three topics, who are in fact crucial for the war in Ukraine, to stop the brutal invasion of Russia. We are blocked. Money, as I said, we will see what will happen in the next council meeting. Maybe we will have, or it will be necessary there to find a way out of the blackmail of Orban by creating a financial system outside the budget, so that no unanimity is needed. On military equipment, we are stuck because we need to refinance EPF, European Peace Facility, and that is not possible for the moment. And then thirdly, on sanctions, you know where we are. So we are blocked in the 12th sanction package already for months. So already for months, it's impossible to take a decision on a 12th sanction package. So I think what happened yesterday is okay on accession. We have made a huge step forward, but the three big issues linked to the survival of Ukraine and to win the war against Russia, we are still stuck in this unanimity and in the blackmail of Orban. And I'm talking about money, I'm talking about sanctions, and I'm talking about military equipment that is in urgent need for Ukraine. So, for me, the conclusion of yesterday is that we need to absolutely reform the Union. This is not workable with 27. It will be not workable with 36. And the European Parliament has made a number of proposals in that sense. And what is good, that is that in the conclusions of the Council of today, I hope that they don't disappear at the moment we speak, these conclusions. They say that in the conclusion of the European Council that reform is needed in the Union, that is reform. They want to prepare it in the upcoming councils next year to define then a roadmap on the future of Europe in the June Council. And so that means that at that moment they need also to take a decision and to take a position on the request of Parliament on Article 48, as you can imagine. So that is also. I don't hope that this part, what I'm now mentioning, is disappearing in when they finally and officially conclude, but in the draft conclusions that I have seen for today, so the reform part is also mentioned. And then finally, on your question, well, things are open. My fear is that if we don't really urge the Commission, look, if you continue on that path, we will draw our support to you. My fear is that in January, this blackmail of Orban will continue, and that we will not only see a disbursement, a defreezing of 10 billion, but maybe of additional billions without any improvement of the situation in Hungary itself on the issues of the rule of law, freedom of the press, corruption, and so on.
Thank you very much for an extensive answer to my, hopefully not provocative, hopefully a productive question. But I also wanted to ask about the initiatives and the political pressure that the European Parliament is putting on the European community at large. I say not in a legal sense, but in terms of all the stakeholders, to raise the ambition and to maintain the ambition for reform, and specifically the recently adopted, by admittedly not too big a majority, call for a treaty reform. This is maybe one of the brighter instances of concrete proposals for reform. It covers both institutional and also political substantive changes. It envisions substantive changes. So I have a couple of questions. One, I think, is that given the difficult, even among the supporting community, process of adopting the resolution, what do you feel the political momentum of maintaining the parliamentary pressure is, A? And B, how do you see the two strands of the resolution as it stands now, the more institutionally focused aspects, yes, about how to reform the decision-making processes, how to transform the European Commission as it stands now into a much more efficient European executive, on the one hand, and then the substantive changes in terms of what kind of priorities, what kind of competence the EU has, how it commits to certain political objectives, be it climate change or gender equality, and so on and so forth. So if I could have a bit of a comment before we open the floor to, I'm sure, many people who are interested to raise their own questions to you, I'd be very thankful.
Well, as you rightly indicated, this is not only about institutional change, but also about extending the competences of the Union on issues that are very clear. So and not contestant, I would say. Health union, for example. After the pandemic, everybody said, "Oh, we need a health union." So then, secondly, defense union. If we don't understand today that we need to establish a defense union as the Europe being pillar of NATO, then we are stupid, naturally, because tomorrow Trump is coming back in the White House, and he stops his involvement, or he wants to reduce the American presence in Europe and inside through NATO. Then we are in real trouble. So the defense union is absolutely so health union, defense union, energy union. So that's not new. And the energy union dates back. We started with that officially in 2006 in Hampton Court in UK. Last Council of Blair, Tony Blair. But we did nothing with it. So we didn't give it any substance. This energy union. So what the proposal of Parliament is doing, And that is also explaining, because people say, yeah, it was not a large majority. No, and the reason is very simple, because it's so a large treaty reform that we have put forward. It's 180 pages on substance, on policies, on whatever whatever other element of the treaties. So and therefore, yeah, you can always find something. Oh, I don't like this. Oh, I don't like that. So the fact that there was a majority for so a broad and intense reform of the treaties is in such, I think, an important political fact. And what is secondly important is, as I repeat myself a little bit, is that in the Council conclusions, they are recognizing for the first time openly that during this accession treaty, accession period for the European Union, we need also to have a reform path during that same period. And the fact that they want already to have a roadmap ready for that in June is, I think, it's such positive.
And just to not let the one other aspect of my question slip, I wanted to ask about the sustainability, the perceived sustainability of this political momentum that I think you rightly celebrate, that indeed to just get this majority...
Look, that will depend on the next parliament. So there are elections.
I was just about to ask, given that we hear continuously, I'm sorry, that different party families are reimagining themselves and their electoral positioning. We know that the center right is sort of reinventing itself. I wanted to ask a little bit about what your take is on the other party family views on this matter and how they may evolve as we build up to June.
I think the support is there. Otherwise, there was no majority in Parliament. That's the first thing. Secondly, what will happen after the election? That is difficult to say, but there will be a new Parliament. So, and I hope that there will be still that same majority to go forward with this reforms. In any way, this civil society, so I will be more on the side of the civil society because I'm not candidate anymore in the next elections. I'm an old man, so you have to give the room for young people. So I'm not candidate for the next mandate, but I became president, as you know, of the European Movement International a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. It is my intention to build a civil society movement around the European movement who will push the member states, Parliament, Commission towards such an agenda and to take that seriously and to do the reform we absolutely need it in parallel with the progress of. So I think civil society can play an important role, and that's exactly the role that the European movement played at the beginning of the whole process of European integration. You remember that end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s.
Thank you very much. And indeed, we have a good number of representatives of the civil society in various forums in the room, among other stakeholders, national and otherwise. So I wanted to give a chance for them to also ask questions and hear your opinions, and not only usurp the microphone myself. Is there anybody who would like to ask anything of Mr. Verhofstadt? It's a good chance. Please introduce yourself and yeah.
Okay, I'm not a representative of the civil society. I'm a representative of the European Parliament, and I fully agree with the analysis of Guy Verhofstadt, but I'm afraid that the political dynamics are not in our favor. For instance, to give you concrete examples, in Italy, we have a government who is not so much pro-European. It improves itself as time goes by, but it has a long way to go. Even in Greece, where we have a pro-European government, public opinion and the political parties are against, let's say, abolishing the right of veto for, let's say, they believe that it is a way of defending ourselves as Greeks vis-à-vis Turkey, which is a major regional power. I don't share this view, but unfortunately, this is the predominant view. So how are we going to deal with all these contradictions? I mean, we agree among ourselves the way to follow, where we have to go, but I very much doubt that the political system, the large part of it, follows us. So since Guy Verhofstadt is, I consider him a wise person, I want him to give me a solution. Thank you.
Well, for me, the solution is simply to use the pressure of the outside world, of this outside world on us, to go forward with that and to propose an alternative for unanimity. So what we did in the work in the Constitutional Affairs Committee was not to say only, oh, we want to abolish unanimity and thank you very much. No, what we said is we wanted to replace by a new set of decision-making rules. And what is this new set? Unanimity would still be the rule for accession. Secondly, for issues like national European security, European defense, executive missions of the European Defense Union, there we introduce what we call the consensus rule. That means that you need 4 countries to block a decision. You cannot block it alone. You need to have at least 4 countries. Because on executive missions and defense, we think that the interests of all countries are so big that we need. And then 3, on we would create for a number of issues that are important, what we call super-qualified majority voting. That's the 4/5 of member states who are necessary. And last and most importantly, we will change also the actual qualified majority of 55% into a system where you need 2/3 of the member states to decide by qualified majority, increasing dramatically the power and the role and the influence of smaller and medium-sized member states. My analysis is that there will never be the use of the passerelle that exists today to go from unanimity to qualified majority as it is, if you don't change, first of all, qualified majority voting itself. And you give a bigger role, more power, more influence to small and medium-sized member states in the process. Because if you make a good analysis of the actual system, the Lisbon Treaty decision-making process, it's a system made around a veto power for France and Germany. And that's the reason why the Polish government or the Italian government or the Greek government or whatever government doesn't want to use the passerelle. They don't want to lose influence to give this influence and more power to the French-German, common cooperation. And that's the case. So the way forward is not by saying, oh, we're going to abolish unanimity. No, we're going to abolish unanimity. We're going to replace it by another set of decision-making rules that strengthen the role of small and medium-sized member states inside the decision-making process in the Union. And look, I was lead rapporteur on this file, and I got 4 German co-rapporteurs. Can you imagine? 4. It's a lot, eh? Who were, and I convinced them to go in that direction. Nevertheless, was not in there to consider such a move in that direction. it was not finally approved by the plenary. But what was important is that these German rapporteurs, like also the French, accept today. That's also in the French-German paper. You know, there is a French-German paper on the reform of the treaties, and also in that paper they accept the need to change the qualified majority and the other decision-making processes in the Union to get rid of unanimity. And that's a huge step forward. That the two countries, France and Germany, who have in fact a crucial veto power in the Lisbon Treaty today, in the way the Lisbon Treaty has been fixed, that they are ready to open that debate and to increase the influence and the power of small and medium-sized member states.
I think we have time for just one more question, and I saw the gentleman in the back raise his hand, so if you could introduce yourself and ask the question. Thank you.
Ms. Verhofstadt, hello. My name is Konstantin Egetz, and I'm a correspondent for Deutsche Welle in Lithuania. I would like you, if possible, to use your crystal ball and take a look at the upcoming elections. And what interests me specifically is that we keep hearing about this sort of right wave that's going to sweep through the parliament, and that presumes that there's going to be more anti-integrationist, anti-Ukraine sort of MEPs eventually in the parliament. On the other hand, we keep hearing about fissures, let us say in AfD in Germany, concerning Ukraine, that there are people that say, well, we actually should support it. How do you assess this situation? How do you assess trends regarding integrating Ukraine, Moldova, and other aspirant countries in view of this kind of landscape changes in the European Parliament? Thank you.
I see that the connection bars are red, so I think the crystal ball is malfunctioning. Is it back? No. It's Mr. Verhofstadt's internet connection, as you can see.
It's not good.
It's rather normal.
Yeah.
Now it's better. You hear me?
Yes.
With some difficulty, but yes.
Okay. So what I think. I think that this enlargement process is now launched, and there is no power that will stop it anymore. There is the will of the 27, or the 26, I have to say, to go forward with it. And on the other hand, absolutely aspiration of these countries, especially of Ukraine, to enter in the Union. And that is the international environment. The international environment gives us one lesson, that is that no country is secure outside a big international continental bloc or organization. Look, that's the reason why Finland and Sweden wanted to become NATO member. And that's the reason why Ukraine wants to become a member of the European Union. There is, in the brutal world of tomorrow, the world of empires, no security outside a bloc. And in our case, a European bloc, a European Union in size, big in size, and strong internally. And that, in my opinion, is a wisdom, a knowledge that more and more ordinary citizens see and accept. They see also what is happening on their television screen, what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening in the Middle East, what is happening in the elections in America, how it is possible that Trump's return, and their meaning is, yeah, we need Europe. Maybe not this Europe, but we need Europe to secure ourselves, to be safe in the world of tomorrow. And that feeling, we will see what is the outcome of we will certainly see an anti-establishment vote, probably. Populist maybe will gain momentum, but whoever is in power for example, what happened to Brexit. I remember that at the moment of Brexit, Farage and others, also Mr. Wilders, said, oh, that's only the start of a process, disintegration of the Union, and the next country is Dexit, the Danish, Nexit, the Dutch going out, Frexit, the French going out, and so on. And what happened was completely the opposite. That is that in all these countries, people said, oh, we have also some doubts about the Union, but not so stupid to go out of the European Union as the Brits are. And they see what happens now. So, and all these leaders, Wilders and Le Pen, they all don't talk anymore about a Brexit or a Frexit or an exit and so on. Well, I'm pretty sure that the same will happen also on the issue of enlargement, on the issue of the safety of our continent, the security on our continent. They are all against the European Defence Union, all against maybe an enlargement, all against the. But that will change because the reality is changed. Ourselves, so that we can defend ourselves in this brutal world of tomorrow. And even populists will have no arguments against such an existential feeling, I think.
Even though the technological reality has tried to impede us, but I think that a voice that the political, geopolitical reality might foster European cohesion is as optimistic a pessimistic message as one can get. So we thank you very much for your intervention and for answering all the questions. If you have the time and the ability, please stay engaged and chime in. But we have to move on to other panelists as well now. Thank you very much once again.
Bye-bye.
And even though I made a brief introduction already to Mr. Ostravicius, I will just repeat not the introduction of the speaker, but the framing of the initial remarks. As I said, Mr. Ostravicius is one of the co-sponsors of an upcoming European Parliament report on exactly the topic of today's conference on deepening integration with a view of enlargement. And what's very interesting is to see how it fits in as a, something of a value-add initiative to the larger debate, ongoing debate, both in the Parliament and beyond, on enlargement and reform, and especially with the view of the political momentum, the political mobilization, the political agenda of these two parallel processes. So without further ado, and thank you again for convening the conference, Mr. Ostravicius.
Thank you, Justinas, and morning to everybody. Although the European Parliament is a rather transparent institution, but sometimes we make so many decisions one by one, so that's why there is a need to explain in a bit, kind of zoom-out attitude what is going on and where we are. And although Guy Verhofstadt, who already was lucky, to receive a support for his report on treaty changes, and that report was approved by the European Parliament, but we are in a different stage now, because the report, Justinas, you rightly mentioned, I am co-rapporteur of two committees report. It's Constitutional Affairs Committee and Foreign Affairs Committee. And I have my co-rapporteur, Pedro Pereira, Portuguese, representing the Constitutional Affairs Committee, and me, the Foreign Affairs Committee. And our task is not just, to take one line or to explain enlargement or reforms, but we have to merge. We have to merge and to explain how it might go and what is the position and point of view of the European Parliament on possible reforms, needed reforms, in a view of inevitable European next stage of enlargement. So that's why I'm really very happy for being able to take part in this exercise. It's really eye-opening. It's a lot of positive experience and very rich experience in this regard. And I will bring you probably most important things which from my point of view are might be useful for you to know. Is the political elite of Europe ready for enlargement? Citizens, yes. 63% of European citizens in average, are supporting EU enlargement. And definitely it will be a different enlargement. I don't think we can repeat bit by bit the enlargement from 2004. It will be a big bang, because we are speaking about potentially 10 countries, maybe 8 countries first, then others will consider and follow. But it is a big one. But it will be a different kind of big bang, and we have to have this in mind. So this political support is important. You see it through, work and engagement of your colleagues from different countries and different political parties. And in fact, once speaking about reforms and enlargement, I can tell you, I understood that there are 2 schools. The first one speaks about reforms first, all right? As a precondition, as a first stage. And then enlargement must follow, all right? I belong to a school of the second, which would prefer to have, as we call it, parallel, hand-in-hand process, okay? We know it will take time. Nothing is guaranteed from very start. It will be not necessarily easy to find all the solutions, and some solutions must be, I believe, somehow newly found based on EU good experience in this regard. But reforms and enlargement should go in parallel, hand in hand. Otherwise, we will disillusion those countries of enlargement. We will bring absolutely negative and the wrong message to those countries which did so much. And finally, if you took a note of European Commission's enlargement package from 2023, what is different in this from my point of view? There is an absolutely different meaning and importance of the geopolitical dimension. And we know where it comes from. It comes from the war of aggression against Ukraine, right? Changing geopolitical picture of the world, China's growing influence, disinformation and propaganda, foreign interferences, and so on and so forth. We live in a different world. Europe is not an exception. And we have to bring Europe into this picture and make right decisions completely with the full understanding what is what. And the second, by the way, part which I found a bit in addition is something different in enlargement package. Of course, it's a very strong, and rightly so, I would emphasize time and time again, on fundamental values, democracy, rule of law, media freedoms, and so on and so forth. I mean, there can be, those things are not for negotiations. They are for full implementation from very start. And let's be serious about this. What kind of key points? By the way, our report will be not too long. We don't think it should be too long, because now we have Verhofstadt report with on EU reforms, treaty changes. By the way, yesterday we got, I would bring to your attention another, to my mind, very valuable contribution from the European Parliament, a resolution on 30 years of Copenhagen criteria, giving further impetus to EU enlargement. It's a very good report, very substantial, very clear, bringing absolutely strategic messages in this regard. So our report, as I said, will be kind of the part of both coming into the possible solution. So what are the key points? Firstly, what EU reforms and when? As I said, first school wants, to have, just EU reforms and enlargement later. Second, reforms versus enlargement timetable. What is the kind of the time-wise adjustment of those two processes? Okay. And third, should we mention any reference to the enlargement time framework? There are different opinions about this. Although this report on Copenhagen criteria rightly mentions the 2030 as a start of the process. Okay, so I can tell you that we had many meetings. By now, we already had 2 meetings with shadows on our text. Almost 6 hours spent negotiating, not necessarily very successfully, but we reached a certain compromise on major points which I want to quote to you. What comes to this notion on, what comes first and when it comes, so we put it, by now we have such a compromise text, which I may quote to you. Believes, however, that the next EU enlargement should take place as soon as all accession conditions are met in the candidate countries concerned and necessary. We quarreled about this word necessary or long hours. Necessary European reforms are agreed, okay? Hopes that the first candidate countries are ready to join the European Union by the end of this decade, meaning 2030. To my mind, it's a good text. In other parts of our resolution, we mention even a word parallel, reforms and enlargement in parallel. It's a very strong message to my mind. It doesn't bring any possibility to demand something to be done before other things on enlargement, for example, might be given a way forward. So that's why I think this is very important. Secondly, what I want to bring to your attention, we make a very strong emphasis on fundamental principles, rule of law, democracy, media freedoms, and we put it in our text like no shortcuts. During negotiations, there can't be any shortcuts on those. So we are learning already from experience of some fully fledged member states' performance, sorry to say. So as it was said, it's non-negotiable. That's it. And monitoring mechanism. So of course we have to trust, we have to assist, we have to go in reforms and be together, but monitoring should be something which is very important as well. And thirdly, there was quite a discussion in our group, in our negotiations on observer status to new member states. You know, that there are, in principle, one way already established. Any acceding country is given observer status, already calculated by representation principles and the Hond principle, so-called, once treaty is signed, once the accession treaty is signed. But we all understand it will take time. To have an accession treaty on table, like this one, the Lithuanian accession treaty on my right, you know, it takes time. I mean, it's a lot of legalistic work. It's a lot of things which have to proceed before. So that's why we proposed another way, or I mean, something in between. We put it as suggests to consider granting candidate countries an observer status in the relevant European bodies and institutions, including the European Parliament, if negotiations are sufficiently advanced, in particular of clusters of fundamentals and external affair relations. Though you know that there are 6 clusters, okay? So we took those who are most connected to the fundamental values, European values, as well as affiliation with the foreign and security policy, on which, by the way, the enlargement package of this year makes a particular point as well. So, as I said, on clusters of fundamentals and relations, and at the latest, once the accession treaties have been signed and all the necessary conditions are met and agreed. So it means that we are opening a certain, gate, time gate between the, as our proposal is, closure of those 2 clusters, and by probably preparing the accession treaty as such. When it might come, I don't know. I do support Roberta Metsolas, President of the European Parliament, call for granting the observer status to candidate countries. It's important because we know they will have to learn a lot in addition, being with us. And this is a great school, a great political school, so that's why we shouldn't be afraid. But, of course, for example, if we are to open the observership status by closure of 2 chapters, we will have to invent extra model of representation, because still, we will have no final agreement on, for example, how many members, for example, Ukraine will have in the European Parliament. But I think it's doable. It's doable. It's not a big problem. To my mind, a goodwill and readiness to go forward. It's something which might help to do all those things. And indeed, I have to be very frank with you. We, in spite of those political issues which are important, we made a rather clear statement, which is still to be finally agreed, on, on sectorial reforms of the European Union. It's inevitable. And indeed, we will come to this point. For example, now, as Compromise 15 stands, stresses that enlargement is both a major financial challenge for the European Union, in particular regarding cohesion and agriculture policies, who can disagree, and an opportunity to reform the European Union. Points out that this challenge requires a properly designed, prioritized and funded MFF and multi-annual financial framework, multi-yearly budget of the European Union, and a more effective EU budget that enables the European Union to take new commitments while continuing to deliver on existing programs and political priorities. It's clear, we indicate that we need to come up with the solutions for those sectorial policies. I can't imagine the common agriculture policy being continued as it is. So we have to react. We have to react to emerging new reality. But the dedication and readiness, many mountains can be removed. So I'm very optimistic. So here I stop, Justinas, and looking forward for your possible questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Since the rest of the panel is all here, so I'll wait for the follow-up questions after all the other speakers have made their initial remarks. And I'm very happy to, following yours, that provide a more practical, let's say, pragmatic, but still an optimistic outlook agenda on enlargement and reform, to turn to our next speaker, who hails from a country that has been very, very concerned, I think, about making all these processes practical, and that's Denmark. And the speaker is Karen Melchior, who's a member of the European Parliament, and before that, a long-time diplomat for Denmark. And I'm very interested to hear this position, from this, I guess, dual role as both an experienced diplomat and also as a member of the European Parliament who's involved not only in the external relations of the Parliament with through the delegations of to the EU-Armenia Parliamentary Partnership, EU-Azerbaijan, EU-Georgia, which is relevant for the enlargement, but also on questions that are very close to the heart of European values, specifically women's rights and gender, and also I think to the future of European governance, which is the digital dimension of EU policymaking. But to limit the scope of the initial remarks, I think there's a lot of ground to cover in the follow-up discussion. I would like to hear your view as both, a member of the European Parliament and a participant in all these discussions that both Mr. Verhofstadt and Mr. Ostravicius have presented, but also, as someone closely involved with the Danish thinking and decision-making. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christine. I think, they're called the Copenhagen criteria because they were decided in a European Council in Copenhagen in 2002 when the world was completely different. We were much more optimistic about having more and more democracy as we had more and more market economy. And we were thinking that this was something that was kind of going to happen by itself. We'd seen the fall of the Berlin Wall, we'd seen the end of the Cold War, and the world was just going to be more democratic and more open by itself. We didn't really have to do that much or change that many things at a political level for this to happen. Denmark was a big champion of the first wave of enlargement, especially supporting the Baltic states. I think one of the first countries to recognize the Baltic states after their re-independence, after the fall of the Soviet Union. And this provided a lot of personal political engagement from our heads of state and our foreign ministers. And I think this was crucial for having leadership in the enlargement process. We also saw this again in 2022. Denmark has opt-outs to the European treaties. For example, in the defense, we had an opt-out until 2022. And no politicians have really succeeded in winning referendums on removing these opt-outs or changing them into opt-ins, which is an option under the Lisbon Treaty, where we can choose to go, I promise not to be too jargony. In '93, we got the opt-outs, where we're saying we are not going to be part of the euro, defense, justice and home affairs in sort of criminal law. And we're not allowed to do that. We need to have parallel agreements with the European Union, and therefore the European Commission needs to say, well, it's in the interest of the EU that Denmark joins on these sectors. We have the option of having an opt-in version in the protocol of the Lisbon Treaty, where we don't have to ask for permission. But the Danish politicians, they would have to ask the Danish population in a referendum if we can change our opt-outs into opt-ins. And there has not been more than 1 out of 3 referendums that the Danish government has won on this purpose. The one that they won was on the defense, and that was after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, when there was sufficient political momentum to ask the question and to actually campaign for it. Because there is a disconnect, I see, between governments and national politicians and European questions and also European enlargement. There is not enough political ownership amongst national politicians to actually campaign for and connect with voters to convince them of enlargement and the benefit of the European Union with their voters. It's not seen as an existential threat not to have European integration and European enlargement. That has kind of changed with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but it is something I think we need to fight for keeping at top of mind of national politicians. If you look at the Danish attitude to treaty reform, from especially the government side, but also from my colleagues in the European Parliament, they're very reluctant to introduce treaty reform. They see, well, we can work within the treaty as we have it, And also, they do not see the proposals for treaty reform as something that would be benefiting Denmark and Danish interests. I think that's why the idea of changing the qualified majority voting in the Council to give more weight to small member states is important. But for example, if you have, this is a quite large table, around at least 30 or 40 seats, it's very difficult to have intense political discussions amongst so many people that we are in this room. Just as it's difficult in a commission of 30, 35, 36 to have intense political discussions and take decisions amongst the College of Commissioners. That's why in the Lisbon Treaty there is an opening for reducing the amount of commissioners that there are. But just as turkeys don't vote for Christmas, small member states or member states, they do not vote for reducing them having a seat at the table. They want to keep the influence that they have, and they do not see the need of removing any powers from themselves before it's absolutely necessary. So I don't think that we will see treaty reform supported from the member states in the Council until they see it as an existential threat to themselves to make that reform. We've had the crisis with Poland and Hungary, their governments there, for the last at least 8 years. Hungary even longer, 10, nearly 15 years. But still, the other member states have not seen it as important enough to make the treaty reforms to be able to reduce the sort of sabotaging power of individual member states. Because they've been able to sort of pay their way off. We've seen the Council freeing the funds for Orban without there actually being any real substance in making that decision. Because it's easier for them to sort of just quiet him than it is to actually deal with the fact that he is not following European values, that there is not rule of law in Hungary, there is not free media, there is not free universities, there is not affiliation with fundamental rights, external policy of Hungary within the European Union. But it is easier to just ignore that rather than make the changes that are necessary. So I think we will only see institutional reforms within the EU supported by the Council when they cannot avoid it. They really need to be pushed by external factors in order to make the necessary changes, and they will only make what is absolutely necessary changes. They will not make the changes that will make good functioning European Union that will be able to swiftly and efficiently take decisions. They will only take what is absolutely necessary. And I think we have a disconnect between national politicians with reality of the need for reform of the EU institutions. Because looking at the geopolitical reality, we need to have a much more efficient decision-making union than we have at the moment. But it is not yet an existential threat for the national politicians to do this. And therefore, they are not making the choices for institutional reform, but they're not also out campaigning and advocating for the need for these changes. In 2015, we in Denmark had a referendum regarding Justice and Home Affairs Cooperation on the opt-out. There was a poll saying that there would be a small majority for winning the referendum about changing this opt-out to an opt-in. So the politicians didn't see it as being necessary to go out and campaign and convince voters to vote yes in this referendum. So the referendum was lost. It's bad for business, it's bad for families, it's bad for the safety of Danish citizens that we have this opt-out, but it is not an existential crisis for the national politicians, so they didn't make the efforts to change it. And I think that is one of the dangers that we have looking at enlargement, is that unless there is a full-scale invasion of, for example, of Ukraine, unless there is really an existential threat to the European Union, that the national level politicians and the government see and feel themselves, they will not spend media time or political capital to keep their voters and populations engaged in keeping the motivation and the popularity of the European Union alive in these populations. And they will sort of, they will avoid talking about it because they don't see it necessary. And that provides very fertile ground for propaganda and misinformation from outside, and that will be able to undermine the democratic institutions. Because one of the things that we had in that we were missing focus on in the Copenhagen criteria 30 years ago was what happens when you then join the European Union. What happens if a country like Poland or Hungary have a democratic backslide and they no longer fulfill the Copenhagen criteria? How do we deal with it? We have now a reformed Article 7, but still there is not a willingness amongst the member states to actually apply Article 7 towards a country like Hungary, because it's seen as too radical to do that. So we need to, and I'm very happy that in our resolution about the 30 years of the Copenhagen criteria, we added in that we need to maintain the upholding of the criteria for member states as well once they've joined, because we are in a completely different geopolitical situation now and a much less sort of optimistic political atmosphere where it's much more about sovereignty than an idea of a borderless democratic world that is moving towards more freedom by and of itself.
Thank you very much. I do grapple with the, how to say, impracticality of the model where we only advance through crises. It's a very dangerous gamble. But I'm happy that, you know, there are definitely various external voices, including from the expert community, that shows that there is a lot to be done, there's a lot that can be done, and in some cases that there are already seeds being sown on something we can do further. And I have in mind specifically Professor and Dr. Michael Emerson, who's in his, you know, how to say, celebrated career as a researcher, and before that as a member of the European Commission, has contributed a lot to the debate on how practically we can make the EU work better, and specifically how we can make the enlargement better. And I note that some of the ideas that he's been promoting since at least you know, the end of the last decade on state accession are appearing slowly in such initiatives as, for example, the growth plan for the Western Balkans. So with your expertise on what can be done, with your practical solutions on how to improve both the enlargement institutional setup and the methodology and the EU functioning as a whole, I want to, you know, invite your perspective on how to say, make that happen in this adversarial, let's say, political climate, or at least a challenging political climate that Karen just presented. So the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back in Vilnius. I'll be happy to make a few precise points on both the subject of the EU's purely domestic internal reform and also on the enlargement methodology. But first I have to recall when Vilnius became first engraved in my awareness, which happened to be in February 1991. I suppose that is it. And I had just early in February 1991 arrived in Moscow to open the European Commission's first delegation there as a gesture of support for the good Gorbachev. And the day after, that happened. And so, and in Riga, as we know, these terrible happenings. I asked my authorities in Brussels whether I should pack up and go home. They said, no, you've got to carry on. So now, fast forward over 3 decades. Here we are today, and I have to salute the huge national achievement of Lithuania over these 3 decades. Right, now on to current business. EU institutional reforms. 3.5 points. Number 1, old friends, more qualified majority voting, less vetoes. As Verhofstadt was saying, opposed by many Northern European countries, to which I would say today, get real. Where in the European Union, amongst the member states, do you prefer to see predominant influence over your future? Is it in the hands of Mr. Orban or Macron, for example? And I think that answers the question, to my mind. Verhofstadt was making a bargaining point about revising the weights for qualified majority voting for smaller and medium-sized countries. Okay, that's an issue. I would add now my half extra point on this qualified majority voting business concerns Article 7 of the Lisbon Treaty, which those of you in the business will know is a suspension clause, suspension of the voting rights in the Council of a member state that was profoundly disrespecting our democratic values. And now Orban is a good candidate for this. I would say it's been a bit surprising that this Article 7 activation has not been much discussed recently, even, and that I think is because it was obvious that the pre-Tusk Polish government would have been acting in coordination with Orban in order to prevent the vote required, namely unanimity of 27 minus 1, namely the one being the offending country. Okay, so now we have Tusk, good show. We have Fico maybe to worry about, but I'm not quite sure yet how severe that worry is. But leaving that on one side, I would submit to the MEPs here present and to the member state governments, it's about time we activated discussion and possibly began to activate Article 7 in view of what Mr. Orban did yesterday to the proposal to finance support for Ukraine. One might put into the European Parliament's wish list for amendments to the treaty an amendment here to change the voting rule, the final implementation decision, from 27 minus 1 to a supermajority of 4/5 of member states. Right. Next, old friend reduced the number of commissioners in accordance with the not yet implemented provision of the Lisbon Treaty. The final point, and really the biggest one as of today, it's time for the European Union to get real over something really serious, structured and substantial by way of defence community or defence union, which should, of course, start off a bit like the Eurozone for a large number, but not all member states, to exclude the small neutrals, Ireland, Malta, Cyprus, Austria, not so small, and also to exclude countries who would not be politically really committed, which would exclude Orban or Hungary again. Now, to turn now to enlargement methodology reform, and this gets a bit technical, but it is absolutely in the hands of the MEPs and senior officials and ministers concerned with European affairs to get operational on this. The European Parliament's short draft regulation that we've seen talks about incremental accession methodology, which is okay. I like the expression, but it's not operationally precise. Now we come on to the Commission's recent enlargement package and its side paper entitled Growth Plan for the Western Balkans, which has proposals along the lines that myself and colleagues like, that is to say, offering of financial incentives for progressive step-by-step reforms. But this is, as of now, a half-baked proposal that needs in the next few months to be made more precise and more adequate. By that I mean comparing this half-baked proposal with the proposal which SEPS and many other think tanks have been advocating, the concept of a structured, staged accession, with each stage bringing more financial and institutional advantages alongside advances in fulfillment of the requirements of the 30 plus chapters and clusters. Now, the one major point that's not much discussed in public is our proposal that the penultimate stage, when the candidate would become a member state, a new member state, is that transitionally they would not have veto powers, which would be a reassurance of those member states who are worried about Orban-like behavior from, let us say, Montenegro, with under 1 million population. Well, all deduct, Montenegro is a very nice country, but you get the point politically. So that's the proposal that we would advocate. However, if the qualified majority voting reforms in general proceed, this provision can fade away. It becomes no longer necessary. Now, I've described rather naughtily the Commission's enlargement package growth plan as half-baked. It is half-baked in the sense that it is a proposal which is on the side from the formal accession process of negotiating a compliance with the chapters and clusters. And so it is not integrated in the accession process as it is at present presented, which runs the risk that it becomes a kind of super association arrangement, denying or not going with real accession progress. Now, there's a solution for this that I would like to commend to the honourable members of the European Parliament and Lithuanian senior officials and ministers. It'd be very easy, actually, in a refinement of this proposal in the next few months, to integrate it in the following way. Say the basis is there should be identified reform progress steps, fulfillment of which would bring the advantages. Now, you could define those steps as being categorical improvements in implementation of selected number of chapters, from, you know, the Commission's gradings, early, moderate, good, achievement, implementation. And so one could say, here's half a dozen chapters which we, Albania or Moldova, propose. By the way, Moldova and Georgia should come into this as well. So the candidate country X proposes a package of half a dozen chapters in which they commit to raise their performance from the moderate to the good level, in which case, by doing that, you're integrating the proposal with the accession process. So that is a proposal that we will be advocating in public shortly. And there's a final little proposal that every reasonable person agrees with, but it hasn't yet happened, is this ridiculous business of every one of the 30+ chapters and clusters having to be opened and closed with unanimous decision of the member states. So this should be scrapped. This should become a subject of qualified majority voting that doesn't require treaty change, doesn't even require legislative change. The Commission can announce to the Council that it proposes to do it this way, and the Council can simply agree. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and yeah, again, for showing the space of what's available, and we hope the voice is heard. To turn to the last, but definitely not the least speaker, we go back to Lithuania, and specifically to Vidmantas Purlys, who's an ambassador and now the director of Lithuania's upcoming preparation for Lithuania's upcoming presidency of the Council of the European Union. And I guess so far our discussion has mostly focused on the European Parliament, to some extent on the European Council, on the Leaders Summit, but the Council of the EU and the presidency will have so much on their agenda in the upcoming months, and it will be a very interesting journey, to say the least. We heard from Mr. Verhofstadt that the preliminary council conclusions now said that we will have a reform roadmap to be presented in June, so that's at the very tail end of the Belgian presidency, and right following that we have, all things held constant, Hungarian presidency next. The Lithuanian presidency will come in 2027. That's a bit of a while, from now. So my first question is, what kind of expectations you have for your colleagues, the next coming up presidencies, how Lithuania will contribute to it, and what it hopes to inherit, and how it hopes to move the process further, especially as it coincides with, I guess, the end of the negotiations on the multi-annual financial framework that's due to be adopted in 2027. So thank you, Vidmantas, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Justinas, and thank you, organizers, and Petras Auštrevičius and others for organizing this event. It's a timely event, and right in the aftermath of the European Council, which adopted very important decisions, which we welcome, on inviting Ukraine and Moldova to start accession negotiations, and some other important decisions also. So I will, of course, try to briefly touch upon your questions, but let me first of all outline the view of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania on reforms that are necessary for future EU enlargement. Lithuania was always a very proactive supporter of the EU enlargement. We are cognizant of the transformative power of the EU enlargement, modernization. We went through along that path ourselves, and we are where we are, a successful and strong country at the core of the European Union. Of course, our interest is also to have EU a strong and effective organization. So, and as every organization, EU also has to constantly improve and discuss, exchange arguments as to how to have a best possible balance within decision-making, various policies and so on. But not all reforms that are being discussed in the European Parliament and elsewhere in the academic community are necessarily related to the enlargement process. There are a vast array of proposals as to where, how the EU should develop. But let me just limit the focus a little bit and say that in order to move ahead with the current enlargement, we need to address 3 sets of issues in a priority order. First, we propose to decide on the scope and modalities of the next enlargement round. And we think that in that context, the the principle of judging candidate countries on their own merits is very central, and we have to give it full credibility and respect. Second, we need to carry out an in-depth assessment of and have a structured discussion on budgetary implications for the next multi-annual financial framework, that is the EU budget, and on possible reforms or adaptations of common policies or sectoral policies of the EU. And here we primarily have in mind the common agricultural policy, the cohesion policy, single market, and maybe some others. So, and lastly, if and only if needed, we need to address also institutional issues. In other words, in preparing for enlargement, we should focus on sectoral policies and EU budget rather than on the institutions. We are convinced that more effective union can be achieved without shaking up or unraveling the institutional framework or institutional foundations of the union. In terms of institutions, the EU is prepared for enlargement already now. We had a major institutional reform undertaken within the Lisbon Treaty, and we believe that no treaty change is required to move ahead with the next enlargement round. So the enlargement is treaty, the Lisbon Treaty is enlargement proof, and what we don't want to see is that institutional reform becomes an impediment or a precondition for further enlargement or a delay of enlargement for indefinite future. So when I speak about the institutional reform, I also have in mind the decision-making procedures, for example, the further expanding of qualified majority voting. Yes, we don't see the need to change decision-making procedure as far as in connection to the further enlargement. Yes, unanimity applies in some areas only. It ensures that all member states, including smaller ones, are on equal footing, and all of them are heard and not outvoted. We have also, from experience of negotiating various policies, especially with regard to our eastern neighborhood, we saw as Lithuania that acting faster does not necessarily mean acting better, and majority might not always be right. So, so perhaps we need, for better efficiency, we need to explore the existing instruments better, such as wider use of constructive abstention, enhanced cooperation, passerelle, and so on. So these are all the menu that is already there in the Lisbon Treaty, and we are, of course, would like to see a good exchange of views on those, and of course on other reforms. When it comes to Lithuania's EU presidency, which I am now currently dealing with in 2027, first half, so 3 years from now, of course we hope that by that time there will be a good advance in the accession negotiations with the candidate countries, such as Ukraine, Moldova, and perhaps others. We will need to deal at that juncture with the EU budget for 2027-2034. This will be a time when we will need to wrap up the discussion on budget, and that will be within the remit of the Lithuanian presidency, and also think about implementation of that budget. So by that time, of course, we hope that or expect that this budget will also reflect the need for the admission or integration of the countries that belong to the next enlargement round. I perhaps stop here, and we'll be happy to take up any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. That concludes the first sort of programmatic statements of our speakers, and boy, do I have a lot of questions, but I'm sure that because there was so much content in each of these contributions, many of you also have questions, and maybe some of them will be coinciding. So I'd rather open the floor immediately up to the discussion, and then, you know, extend or compensate for the silence if there is silence, but I'm sure there won't be. So if anybody is, you know, interested in asking a question to any of the panelists, please raise your hand. You all have microphones. Those on the sides, I think there will be a microphone provided. It's important to speak in the microphone because the meeting is recorded. Do I see any initial questions? Yes, Mr. Žuruolis.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask Karin Melchior about, you mentioned that, okay, participation and justice and opt-in into justice and home affairs is not yet seen as an existential need. Let's rephrase it positively, although also, if I note it well, it would benefit businesses and families, etc. But you know, seen more generally, is Russia's war against Ukraine seen as an existential threat to Denmark or not?
Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is seen as an existential crisis and threat to Denmark. We have been a strong NATO member with a Danish Secretary General of NATO, and we see the Russian threat to democracy in Europe as a threat to Denmark. And there has been personal engagement from heads of parties. Our national parliament have had visits to Ukraine, engagement, and also we've expanded our diplomatic relations with Ukraine. We've upgraded the embassy. We have a Danish office in Mykolaiv, and I think this sort of political investment, personally by the politicians, is necessary for the country's engagement in European enlargement and also integration, deepening of that. And that was what has been missing from removing the opt-outs that we've had for, I think that must be 30 years now, since the Maastricht Treaty. So I think this is, you kind of need, I understand Justinas was saying, well, it's dangerous to be reforming and changing policies through crisis all the time. But in order to get the political will to make the necessary changes, unfortunately, sometimes you need a crisis.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Lašas.
Hi, Ainius Lašas, Kaunas University of Technology. I have a question to Mr. Purlys, who was talking that there is no need for reform. Do I take it that you are content with the way things are happening in the EU, in institutions, the way the process works, and you are sort of happy to stay with the status quo, the way, you know, with enlargement policy, with support for Ukraine, with support for others, because your position seems to be that you are saying it's fine the way it is now, we are happy, and we are happy to extend the status quo. Could you comment on this a little bit?
Yes, thank you. Well, you know, the reform of, as it was decided in the European Council yesterday, the reform will go ahead as necessary in order to also prepare for the enlargement. So it's a matter of scope. We are not content with everything that is there. We were happy. We of course do not like, you know. We were happy that the enlargement decisions were unblocked yesterday. That was a problem, of course. But when we talk specifically about enlargement and the next round of enlargement, it is in our view that the current institutional framework and decision making allows for enlargement. So now there is the whole other area of thinking or reflecting about the European Union and where it goes, what final shape it may take. But that's a different discussion. I mean, it takes place in the European Parliament, among the institutions, among member states and groups and otherwise. But what I was trying to convey also is that you know, the opening up a big discussion or treatise is not necessary to continue with this enlargement. So there are elements that are there that allow for negotiating with the new or the next round countries, and institutionally and decision-making wise, EU is ready to do that. So is everything is okay in the EU? I don't think so. I mean, we have to be realistic about that. We need to improve many policies. Then there are a lot of proposals in terms of legislation and so on. So that's a bit another matter, and we are working towards that. We have proposals in terms of you know, to make EU more resilient towards outside influences. We want improvements in the energy sector. We want to remove barriers to the internal market. That is all part of Lithuanian agenda within the EU. But saying that does not mean that all this is directly or directly related to enlargement discussion.
Thank you. I know that Petras Auštrevičius also wants to respond to, I guess, the underlying question raised by Dr. Lašas.
Thank you, Justinas. Indeed so. Well, in fact, there are many questions, I mean, which are on our agenda, and they are not necessarily connected to the enlargement. Definitely. Not connected to the enlargement. But I think what is the prevailing feeling, at least in the European Parliament, that we came to certain time limit, okay? Beyond which, I mean, we have to do something more than we did before. It can be reforms very much cosmetic, very light, something changing sectorial policies, because there are issues which will remain. I think the unacceptable behavior of Orban will continue. For how long? I don't know. But it will. Will it be impossible barrier for Ukraine, I mean, to start negotiations and so on? I mean, remains to be seen. Remains to be seen. But look, even on enlargement, in our report we made very, for example, strong emphasis on, you know, refusal of any bilateral issues. We've already seen, like one or another member state over the sudden raises a bilateral issue, okay? Minorities, history, this or that. And sometimes it's a you know, completely a blockade on any of those. Should we continue like this? Because countries which are now on the list, well, they have some historical interactions. You can even invent bilateral issue if you don't have. I mean, politicians are very inventive. They can do it overnight. if it contributes to their political agenda. So should it be on accession agenda? I don't think so. Institutional reforms. Look, I don't think it's only about enlargement, as I said, but issues are of great importance. For example, status of European Parliament. We still don't have a legislative initiative power. We discuss the European budget only one-sided, like having only one left or right hand. Huh? So what we're doing in the European Parliament with the budget, I mean, it's expenditure side, no revenue side. Is that serious? Will it be really an invitation for member states to increase contributions and to think about the much bigger European budget, which is inevitable? Inevitable. Guy rightly spoke about defense union. What is the defense union? Investments. And defense investments, security investments are usually very big, substantial. Okay? So will we be given really own resources-based predominant European budget with the more powers for European Parliament to decide, to have discussions, scrutiny procedures and so on? I think this is a very essential part of agenda for Europeans. I don't expect, by the way, in Brussels to have demonstrations against Orban, like a breaker of any European good experience or so on, as a bad behavior based politician. Will be no, probably. But again, Europeans feel that Europe must change. I mean, we can't sustain present policies if we just repeat theses from some years ago. Let's have a bit open, more flexible view on it. Let's not probably overburden ourselves. Indeed, I mean, enlargement should go in parallel, but I think it's a high time to start those discussions. Indeed, we need intergovernmental conference, maybe staged in some of them, in order to have first decisions to be made as early as possible. Then let's continue our discussion, but it's inevitable. I don't think we will sustain functionality of the European Union if we are afraid of some decisions which probably have no yet any shape. We don't know yet, I mean, how to agree, but should we abstain from that substantial discussion? I'm not sure. I would be in favor of opening up a chapter.
And then on to Karen, who also wants to.
Thank you very much. I think we've spent a lot of time discussing Orban this morning, and there is an immediate crisis and obstacle for changes and decisions at the European level posed by Orban. But I think we also have a problem with other member states. We've mentioned Fico as well, but there is also Giorgia Meloni in Italy. And it feels a little bit like, as long as they don't sabotage, veto big decisions at the European Council or in the Ministry of Council, then we accept them undermining other fundamental values. We accept them circumventing the way that we take decisions amongst the European institutions. You see members of the European Parliament from the EPP, President of the Parliament, cozying up to Meloni at every chance. She's always in the big pictures, shared in both traditional and social media. At the same time, you have a Team Europe visit to Tunisia with Mark Rutte, the outgoing Prime Minister from the Netherlands, Meloni and von der Leyen going to shake hands with a coup leader, President Sayed in Tunisia, to try and do a migration deal. That we were trying to pay off Sayed to get a migration deal with him, that he then afterwards refused us, in order to give political support to Meloni, to buy her off to support what we want at the European Council. And at the same time, she is undermining the fundamental rights of many families in Italy, removing parents' names from the birth certificates of their children. And this is not being addressed at a political level, heads of state, because we don't want to upset anybody around the table so that they might stop the European project.
Oof. Are there any other questions from the audience? Well, seeing none, I would like maybe to use the last 7 or so minutes that we have remaining for concluding remarks. And it seems like there's this implicit, at least, consensus that not all is right in the, not the Danish, in the European kingdom. Something is rotten. But we either need an external force, be it the civil society, the future generations, Trump as a negative force or something, or we need a crisis. I guess Trump can be both a force and a crisis. But I want to, again, with maybe an incremental view that's so typical of Europeans, to see like what can be done in the next months, I think, as we prepare for the January follow-up to the European Council now, to set the stage for decision-making that is not driven by, fear, crisis, external forces, etc., but still, puts forward, proposals, solutions, or at least contributes to the momentum on to an agenda of integration and reform. So I guess one by one, but maybe starting with Dr. Emerson, because he stayed so respectfully silent during the last exchange.
First, I didn't get it clearly.
Well, I think in the next couple of months we need to continue explaining and elaborating the decisions that we've just made and the necessity for these decisions. Because when you're a politician out campaigning, you spend at least a year repeating the same thing again and again and again, and you get sick and tired of hearing yourself saying that we need an open and free Europe with respect to fundamental rights, because you've said it so many times, but many of the people sitting and listening to you hear it for the first time. And I think we have a tendency of thinking that when we've made a decision in Brussels, that we've prepared for many months within the institutions, that everybody all across Europe understand and know the necessity of this decision and understand the reasoning behind it. And that's not the case. We need to continually campaign for the decisions that we've made at a European level, both amongst the populations, but also amongst the national parliament politicians. I think we need much more integration between the national legislation level and the European legislation level, because they are out of sync with each other in sort of timing, and they're out of sync in understanding of the need for doing this. And I've heard that Albania, as part of the enlargement process, they want to look at using artificial intelligence for adhering to the European acquis, because you have like meters of legislation if you print it all out. But I think that is perhaps not the path to go, because if we just go on a technocratic way of implementing legislation and just looking at have we ticked all of the boxes, then we don't spend enough time making the political argument, campaigning and convincing people of the need for enlargement and integration, and then we will have an even larger disconnect between the political level making the decisions on enlargement and integration and population voters and national politicians.
Yes, if the issue is what we really want to see happen in the next few months, well, March has an important date for the European Council in relation to the onward movement of the enlargement process. So by then, the enlargement methodology needs to be reformed and improved in ways that we have already discussed, and that is a clear-cut set of issues. Secondly, it is the 50 billion package for Ukraine. I mean, if So we guess that as of today, the EU decision makers are thinking about an ad hoc temporary solution of 10 or 12 billion euro, temporarily done off budget, reimbursed by a later proper adoption and implementation of the 50 billion package. Now the question is whether Orban is going to persist in blocking that regularization of the 50 billion proposal. If he does, then this is a huge political issue for us all, not just for the honourable parliamentarians, but for our peoples. I mean, it will be for the people of Hungary to understand that their leader is making of their country a pariah state in Europe. And that message has to be got through and communicated. And we have a lovely model to be replicated. We've seen what Tusk managed to do in the last few months in relation to the highly objectionable prior Polish regime. So these things can change, but it requires political impetus, and somehow our politicians need to focus on getting that together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe let's turn to Vidmantas first, and then Auštrevičius will come.
Thank you. In terms of enlargement policy, I think that it is important now to implement the decisions that were taken yesterday at the Council. We have to work further to establish a negotiating framework for the countries that were invited to start negotiations, and to arrange first intergovernmental conferences so that this important political decision is then translated into the practical action in terms of moving ahead. And as I said, I think that we need to look very carefully at the EU budget to make it, the forward-leaning towards further enlargement, and also address various sectoral policies that will be affected or need to be adjusted to maximize the benefits of further enlargement. Of course, there is a strategic agenda ahead of us. The next year will be a start of a new political cycle within the EU. The strategic agenda is already being discussed by the leaders in the European Council. Lithuania is an active participant in that discussion. We have a number of priorities and proposals within that framework. We want EU to be more resilient to outside malign pressures in terms of energy, disinformation, other vulnerabilities and dependencies. We want to see that internal market is becoming stronger. There are less restrictions that are still prevailing in some areas in terms of services and so on. We would, of course, would like to see EU becoming more competitive and innovative globally, advancing in terms of technological edge, AI, and other areas. I think that those will be key areas for debate in the EU and strengthening of EU in global terms. Thank you.
And then to send us off to lunch, Mr. Auštrevičius.
Yes. to make you more lunch looking for, indeed. Thank you, Justinas. Shortly, well, the fundamental changes in the geopolitical environment around the European Union simply demands EU to be much stronger and bigger. Okay, so here we come that we have to find proper answers to both policies. Those two issues will be, to my mind, very central in European Parliament's campaign. Okay, so we'll hear different opinions. Some of them will be against both reforms and enlargement, and will be many voices like this. Some will be more selective on one or another. Some might support fundamentally both those issues. But what I'm looking for, that the next European Parliament, which is very important and key in this regard, will still remain under control of mainstream European political forces, which will agree, finally, find the way and start the process. So time is not on our side, so we have to understand that if we don't make decisions, somebody makes decisions against us, we might become weaker. So that's why next 6-7 months will be indeed absolutely decisive in for the next EU future. But I am optimistic, as always, we have to be looking at the lunchtime.
Okay, so welcome everybody after the lunch break. My name is Rasa Tapinene and I'm going to be the moderator of the next panel, Ukraine's and Moldova's path to the EU. And it will consist of two parts. First of all, we'll have the introductory remarks from our panelists, and then we'll be open to the questions from the audience. So let me introduce our panelists. Georgios Kyrtsos, member of the European Parliament, Renew Europe Greece. Welcome.
Hello.
Mark Mazurianu, Assist Analytic. Welcome. Amanda Paul, Senior Policy Analyst, European Policy Center. Welcome. And Darius Žeruolis, Advisor to the Prime Minister of Lithuania on Strategic Planning, Public Administration, Reforms and Change Management. Welcome. They all are here in the Constitution Hall, and we'll have Kira Rudik, member of Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine and Vice President of the ALDE Remote Connection. And Kira, I would like to set the stage with you, with your remarks. Can you please start?
Of course. First of all, thank you, Petros, and distinguished speakers for having me today. I'm very sorry that I cannot be there in person and share my happiness and gratefulness on behalf of Ukrainian people. Before I start, I would like to just check how much time do I have for my remarks.
5 minutes.
Oh, it's just like to mention all the good people that supported us in just 5 minutes, but okay. So first of all, I'm coming here with like a very bittersweet energy. I had many meetings today with Ukrainian parliamentarians as well as with Ukrainian people, and we had such an important and absolutely victorious day yesterday. You see 4 flags behind me. It's a flag of Ukraine, flag of my party, HOLOS, first liberal party to ever enter Ukrainian parliament, but also flags of EU and NATO. And it is because becoming members of EU and NATO is an intention that is written in Ukrainian constitution. It is a will of Ukrainian people, and we are here just to make sure that this will comes true. I am coming back to 2014 when the war started, just because Ukrainian people decided that we want to go away from Russia and make sure that we join our European family, and we want to have our European choice executed on. Then to a year ago, when Ukraine got candidacy into European Union, it was such a fantastic and a super important event for us, and it showed us that even during the full-scale invasion, we can make significant progress. And of course, to yesterday, when we have heard yes from our European partners, not on some geopolitical or political decisions, but actually based on merit, based on what we as the Ukrainian parliamentarians, Ukrainian parliament and Ukrainian government were able to execute in terms of reforms to prove not only that we deserve the candidacy status, but that we can move forward. And we consider the work that's being done and exemplary in terms of EU accession based on merit. When the European Commission months and a half ago have issued its report, it was like homework that was checked for us. And we have also seen things that were pointed out with the red line. And during the last 6 weeks, working in Ukrainian parliament, we were able to either remove or fix or explain all the concerns that were there, including the rights of the minorities, which I hope Mr. Viktor Orban have looked into, including the fight with corruption and many other things. So on a political level, we were able to gather all the political will and all our capacity in terms of jurisdictions and in terms of writing the bills and make sure that we come to the point of the decision by European Council as ready as it is possible, because we knew that it would be an important decision. It's very very heartwarming to tell you again and tell to all of you, dear honorary members, but most of all, of course, Petras, who has been such a fantastic ally along the way, such a good advisor and advocate for Ukraine, more than we could ever wish. And I hope that you are happy with us. I believe that you are happy with us. And this is truly historical event that happened, and generations to come would remember these years, and people who, not only the ones who have done these things, but also the ones who were helping us to reach the point. On a bitter point is that as of right now, Ukraine solely depends on the support of our allies in terms of the financial matters. So every single hryvnia or dollar or euros that we gather as a state, we use for our military needs and to pay for our soldiers and to pay for the military support. So all our state expenditures, they are coming from the international support. And right now it is December 14th, right? Where we are still at the point where the United States Congress have not made a decision on the $61 billion of the support for Ukraine for 2024. And when the 50 billion euros support is being blocked. So we are in a true despair, especially after yesterday's being so elated and happy and telling our people that finally we have hope and understanding where we're moving. But now we are getting back to a very simple question on how to survive in 2024. And right now we do not see a very good answer. So we are calling to our allies to make sure that the political diplomacy or whatever was used yesterday to get Hungary on board can be used to get this package approved. And finally, last but not the least, look, we are talking about 50 billion euros a number and $61 billion. These are the things that would make sure that my country survives for the next year. But we should be talking about $500 billion of Russian money that are being frozen in the countries that support us right now. If there would be a legal way and a political will to unfreeze those money and use them for the sake of Ukraine, we will not be in such a desperate situation right now. We would not be in such an instability, being hostages of the political decisions in the countries that really support us. But we will be able to make sure that we have money not only for 2024, but also for the rebuild of Ukraine. And it would be so critical for us. So every time when we are looking at the issue of supporting Ukraine, I'm calling for you to think outside the box and think about other solutions that can be found to find the resources. And we are looking at frozen Russian assets as one of those resources. Something that's being very undervalued, and that is 10 times more than the support that we are trying to get so hard from the European Union or from the United States. With that, I want to thank all of you again. You cannot even imagine what was happening yesterday when people were calling each other, crying, laughing, and saying, well, we finally are telling people that they not only have the fight in front of them, but they also have something good in front of them, joining our European family, having a proof that Ukraine is Europe. And it was such an amazing day. Thank you all for supporting us and making sure that days like this will happen in our life and in our history. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
To the microphone? No? Thank you, Kira. Petras was saying Slava Ukraine and Heroyam Slava. Yeah, we are supporting you, of course, from Vilnius as well, and we are very happy. But let's move for now to the introductory remarks of the other panelists, and then we'll come back to you with the questions. Is it okay? You're staying with us, right? Yeah, yes, okay. So, Georgios, maybe you can...
Thank you very much. First of all, I have to tell you that I really admire Lithuanians, because I was here 2 days before the Russian invasion as a member of delegation of the Security and Defense Subcommittee of the European Parliament, and everybody was explaining us in this building that Russia was about to invade Ukraine, and us, as European parliamentarians, did not really believe what we heard. So I respect the Lithuanian strategic thinking, and of course I respect the efforts made by Petras to explain to the European Parliament and to the European public opinion what exactly is going on with Russia and Ukraine. I think that the enlargement towards Ukraine, Moldova, later Georgia, and the Western Balkan countries is the major strategic objective of the European Union. It's, in my view, it's a make or break situation. Either will succeed or the European Union will be in deep trouble. Because after Brexit, things went rather wrong, due to Brexit rather. First of all, both the European Union and the United Kingdom became smaller in an ever larger and very competitive world. So being big matters. Then we had this, let's say, geopolitical issues, because we miss the United Kingdom and they miss us. I recently visited as a member of another delegation that deals with Brexit issues, and the mood in the United Kingdom is changing. But of course, now they are out and they will probably remain so. Enlargement is very important. To have a successful enlargement, the first prerequisite is that Ukraine has to win the war. Of course, in order that Ukraine wins the war, we have to help Ukraine, support Ukraine to win the war, because Russia is a big power, and Putin has militarized the Russian economy in a rather effective way. And in my view, the discussion we have about the 50 billion euros is kind of outdated. Much more money are needed, and we have to change the balance of power in favor of Ukraine. This is how you win a war. So we need to support in a more effective way Ukraine, and be rather fast in our decisions, because there has to be an element of surprise in what we are doing. Because, you know, we read that Ukrainian pilots will be ready to fly F-16s towards the end of 2024 and things like that. Well, informing your opponent of what you are going to do is not a very wise strategy. if you are in a conflict. The second thing that we have to do, and of course we have to be to move fast, because I come from Greece, and I have to tell you that the enlargement towards the Western Balkans, which has not started yet, was decided in the Thessaloniki summit in the year 2003. At the time I was young and rich, wealthy, but now that I'm old and poor after the Greek crisis, I have to underline that we have to be effective and move faster. The second thing to do is we should not create antagonisms between, let's say, Ukraine and European citizens. European citizens are very sensitive on issues of cost of living and, let's say, the functioning of the state, the national health system, and things like that. So, in my view, there is no enlargement that cannot be enlargement on the cheap. We have to put money on the table in a good sense to help enlargement, and of course enlargement is bound to have some negative effects for the European citizens, but with the necessary policies we can attenuate the difficulties. For instance, common agricultural policy, cohesion policy, and to have frictions right now with Polish lorry drivers, Polish producers. I don't think we should create friction. Instead, we should intervene as European Commission, as European institutions, to solve the problems. There are not problems that cannot, practical issues that cannot be addressed. The third point that I would like to mention is that we need a commissioner responsible for enlargement that really believes in enlargement, because we spent the last 5 years having a commissioner that was appointed from Hungary, from Orban. Of course, he was dealing mainly with Western Balkans, and he created, in my view, a real mess. He supported Vučić. He also supported the ex-Prime Minister of Northern Macedonia, who was convicted in his country, but he has some kind of political asylum in Hungary. So we don't want, we need an effective commissioner, and in my view, it has to be this commissioner has to be chosen from Poland or the Baltic states, because now the enlargement is mainly geopolitical. There are a lot of issues, financial, economic, social, associated with the enlargement, but the main task is geopolitical. So we don't want a commissioner that has a standard Brussels procedure that takes 5 to 10 years to take a decision. We want a personality that can make the difference. The fourth point is that we have a kind of erosion in terms of rule of law in the European Union as well, and this has to be taken care of. It's not only Orban, there is also urbanization in the European Union. The example that I give concerns my country, Greece. We are, according to the Reporters Without Borders annual report, Greece, member of the European Union since 1981, is number 105, let's say, out of 180 countries as far as media freedom is concerned. It's the worst country among the 27 member states, and it's the worst country if you compare it with the Western Balkan countries that aspire to join us. The worst Western Balkan country is Albania. It's 103 in these ratings, and Greece is 105. And Ukraine, which has a lot of problems as far as media freedom is concerned, understandably, because it used to be a Soviet state. It was number 96 in 2020, number 97 in 2021. So we have a member country, Greece, that has more problems than Ukraine as far as media freedom is concerned. or Western Balkan countries like Albania, which is the worst case. So instead of giving lessons to the aspirant countries, the countries that aspire to join us, we have to give a positive example, improve the situation in the European Union, and raise the standards. Finally, we have to have a different approach, more practical approach in politics, and solve concrete problems. Okay, the institutional aspect is important, but we have to be practical. I have some paper clips here. U.S. U.S. hits Turkey and China on Russia trade. Turkey, which wants to join the European Union, in theory at least, does not apply sanctions. Then I go back to what you, Le Figaro, l'Europe avance à petits pas sur la saisie des avoirs russes. I agree with you that we have to do something with the billions of the Russian oligarchs that are in the European Union. Then we have International Herald Tribune, troops on front line feel the bite of Polish truckers' protest. We have to solve this problem. Financial Times, Polish truckers' blockade reveals mood hardening towards Ukraine. And of course, there is a Greek, everywhere you go, there is a Greek dimension to the issues. The shadow fleet helps Kremlin evade oil price cap. Shadow fleet, I mean merchant fleet. So this is, in my view, how we should proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgios, for your thoughts. And Amanda Paul, let's hear you now.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be back in Lithuania. You're a great country, and you've always been a great supporter of Ukraine and enlargement in general. I also want to congratulate Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia as well for this amazing success. I was asked to talk about what more the EU can do to support reforms, so I just have a few points related to that. Just to sort of reiterate what Georgios just said, I mean, the first thing that should be done is about the military assistance, because honestly, I'm sick and tired of hearing excuses as to why weapons aren't delivered or they come too late. This is just not acceptable. So that's my first point. The second point is something that's been said already. This reform process needs to happen in parallel with enlargement, because this enlargement reform, because this is the only way that we're going to see that the EU is really serious. I mean, seriously getting ready to get fit to take in more members. The former Turkish chief negotiator used to say that the EU was like a dietitian, and the candidate was the patient, but unfortunately the dietitian became fat and overweight, so wasn't capable of even giving the instructions. So I think this is still relevant. Also, I agree that Ukraine needs to see the benefits of this process long before it ends. I mean, it needs to be a merit-based process, but as was already mentioned, there needs to be carrots along the way, and there definitely needs to be a timetable. I mean, the date 2030 is out there, and I think this is a good date, either optimally for full membership, but at the very least, significant level of integration into different parts of the EU. I think this is crucial because it gives the sense of being in, even if you're not fully in, and definitely in the single market, but also in different areas, sectoral cooperation, for example, integration. I think this is really important, and to do this as quickly as possible because it can really help maintain the momentum for reform in the country itself, which hasn't been the case with all of the current enlargement countries, particularly in the Western Balkans. And also to be as clear as possible when it comes to the benchmarks and avoid vague terminology, because I think the EU is getting better on this, but there's still a lot of situations where terminology on benchmarks that need to be met isn't clear enough, and there's a lot of back and forth explanation. So this needs to come an end, along with moving targets. I mean, for me, a key area where the EU needs to do is to help Ukraine in capacity building in literally all of the ministries. They need experts that are brought in many different areas and help Ukraine put in place effective, streamlined teams that are all linked together and can work together. And this is something that needs to be done quite quickly. There was two things in the report that you sent on the Copenhagen criteria from the Parliament that I liked, I have to say. The first was this instrument for arbitration and resolution of bilateral disputes. I think this is really important because there's been so many cases where this has happened. I mean, obviously in the Western Balkans, but in Turkey as well, and this shouldn't happen in the future because it wastes time and it undermines the confidence that the candidates have in the EU. And also, as was just mentioned by you, Georgios, as well, I think there is a necessity to change the portfolio of the Commissioner that's responsible for enlargement so that he actually does enlargement and doesn't have all of the other neighbourhood countries, because I think this makes, I just think it's too much of a big dossier, so it needs to be much more streamlined. A couple of other issues. There's a definite need for more strategic communication to all stakeholders in Ukraine, but also in the EU. And linked to that, more support for countering disinformation in Ukraine, I mean, all forms of disinformation, but also within the EU, because this is going to be crucial for maintaining and increasing support from public opinion. And this needs to be done at all levels, because despite all the efforts to counter disinformation, it's still out there. Let's say Russia and others are getting more innovative in the tools that they use. So it's something that needs to be done. Another area where we can certainly see more support is in independent media and media pluralism in Ukraine. There needs to be more support there. I understand why there has been, you know, the sort of centralization of media during the war, but it's not going to be maintained, and there needs to be more support for this independent media. CFSP, CSDP are also areas where integration should happen step by step. I think it's very useful to have Ukraine further integrated into these. And for me, one of the priorities should be integrating the defense sectors of Ukraine and the EU as quickly as possible. I think this is important, particularly ahead of the establishment of the new security architecture that we're always talking about, but not taking too many steps in that direction. And a last couple of points, if I may, because I'm probably abusing my time. On public administrative reform, I think there's still a lot of extra support that the EU can give. Support to civil society, because civil society is also going to be crucial in this process. I mean, they're like rock stars in Ukraine, civil society. And there needs to be a holistic approach and all of society approach to this integration. So making sure that civil society gets the necessary support and is part of this process all the way through. And my last couple of comments are about the European political community, as it happens. Because I think that this other EPC, I'm from the EPC, this is the other one, can be used as an accelerator in terms of security in Europe, because it's a place where we can discuss collective challenges to security and stability issues with countries that are from, let's say, diverse backgrounds. And also, it's a chance to sort of discuss common regional and threat assessment and get the views from all of the countries and share our experiences. I think it's also important that Ukraine has dialogue with the Western Balkans. I mean, they should sit together to share experiences, best practice, and whatnot. And the very last point, because I know that I'm being really abusive, is actually coming back to the NATO summit, right? This should be a priority now for the EU to be on the same page, to push really, really hard that Ukraine will get something serious out of Washington, because quite honestly, what we got out of Vilnius, and I know that had nothing to do with Lithuania, was significantly less than what it should have been, and very disappointing, because if Ukraine is in the EU, that's really great news, but it will not guarantee Ukraine's security. I'm sorry to say it won't. The only way that's going to happen is with NATO membership, or something that, I mean, some member states coming together, although I don't believe in that. I mean, I believe in NATO membership or nothing, quite honestly. So there needs to be a big push from European partners ahead of the Washington summit. Thank you, and sorry for being far too long.
Thank you, Amanda. And now, Mark, it's your turn.
Thank you so much. I would like to start my presentation with saying a big thank to Petras Austrevicius, who organized this timely meeting, especially timely that I found about me as a Moldovan joining EU already being here. So I had to revise in totality the presentation, because it was incorporating somehow the path, how do we get to this stage, but since we got to this stage, it's like I will talk about possible problems, or like the large set of problems that we'll have to face forward. So since I'm representing a non-profit organization and I'm part of the civil society, I will not talk as a politician, and probably will not be so optimistic. I'll have, like Kira Rudik said, like these double feelings, like one side is joy, another side is like sadness, because in comparison to previous states that became members of the European Union, it was just a decision of improving the political situation, social, like kind of like social condition for Ukraine and for Moldova. This decision, unfortunately, is more existential, because for our states becoming part of the European Union is, in these conditions, similar or equal with saying states and nations will exist or not, because the flip or the other side of the story, we don't want even to imagine what might be the other side of the story. So, and when some politicians were like a part of the politically active people in Brussels claim that the decisions are based on a technical aspects. Come on, guys, like all the decisions are taken like on a political aspects, and those are political structures, and in political political reasoning is always at the top of the list when the decision of taking one state in a military bloc or in political economic bloc is made. Okay, so moving, I will talk now about three types of challenges or problems Moldova is facing now in all this process of adherence, and I split them somehow in three blocks. The first one, I call it existential threats. So if those threats are not approached, might happen that Moldova will not even reach the stage when the voting pro and con will be taken. The second is legitimacy and support. Those are the questions how to make people vote, because frankly, me being from Moldova, I saw so many realities 15 years ago. In Moldova, support for EU integration was 75+%. Then something happened, some like bad guys came to power, and the support dropped like to 30%. Then we had again like increase in support and like drop in support, so oligarchization of the state, de-oligarchization of the state. So all that is always balancing. So like now the support is very, very, I would say, at the minimum limit, 52%. It's like, it's so bad. People are disappointed. Okay, but we'll talk about this later. And the third category of problem is about absorption. In the process of transition, many of the local actors, many of like agencies are very like skeptic because they see the experience of Romania and some bad reverberations are coming from there. Like many claim that you'll not manage to absorb us, especially with EU level of development. And this means like you'll need a longer integration, you might lose support from the society. So, turning to the existential threats. If we look at the national security strategies that was recently adopted, for the first time, Moldova declares in the strategy that Russia is the security state, is a threatening state for Moldova. So Russia is threatening in terms of hybrid warfare that is launching, in terms of DOS attacks launching, different attacks on provoking dysfunctionality of the public services. Only this year, it was practiced. Imagine, more than 400 times have been called the special services, announcing that the public institutions are bombed, are mined. So more than 400 times the airport was closed and made dysfunctional. It's like companies left Moldova for a period when Moldova will find its way how to coordinate and to pacify all the situation. And it was the case of many other institutions the same. So the level of stress in the society increased. People were living in a permanent alert. Disinformation and propaganda. So the level of disinformation propaganda is so high in Moldova and in Ukraine that somehow people already learn how to live with it. It's like it is so much that you barely find the veridic source. It's for those who are not educated, but the majority are not educated on how to select and to filter the information, they simply don't read. So one of the strategy of Russia is not to provide with false information, like, well, false information is true, but they provide you with thousands of realities, thousands of the same versions. I remember I've been working in a research center in Germany, in Mannheim. We were investigating, we were analyzing the propaganda, like how propaganda develops. And I was in charge at that time for investigating the information flux about the Malaysian airline, being put down. In 20 days, they were produced more than 200 different stories from Russian sources. Okay, those are the first part of the challenges. The second are the low support for the Euro integration. If we look through the population, people abroad, Moldovans abroad, are very happy for Moldova getting into Euro structures. If you go inside, none of this joy you'll feel in the air. People, they don't care. Like, if you go to South is populated by Gagauz people, 98% support for the Russian policy. If you'll go to different villages in at the border with Ukraine, also you have huge packs of population supported Russian politics. And all of those, they will have to be convinced and one day to vote for adherence to the European Union. Another problem related to support are political parties. When we look at the political parties, and we have a single political party that is really promoting the Euro integration, and this political party is hopefully in power and is controlling the parliament and the government. Opposition. The three oppositional parties, major parties, they are in pro-Russian support. We have no opposition which would be also decently normally thinking about pro-Europe, but with an alternative version of Europe. So, to encourage Moldova to go forward would be probably to offer support to opposition of the main party, who would also be in favor of a Euro integration. And then if we were switching to the last set of problems is concerning the absorption. Romanians absorbed in agriculture only 20% of the funds. Well, Poland, it was like the hero in absorption of European funds, and it was the leader. But we have neighboring Ukraine, neighboring Romania. Romania is sending bad reverberations on this. Absorption on funds in terms of research and education. Academia in Moldova is very low. Like Moldova already has access to European funds on the research and education, and the absorption is so small that people simply don't know. They don't know how to get to those European funds. So Europe will need to help and to send specialists on helping people to get access to the funds. And education. The last point. Education is so undeveloped that, like, when we talk about education, we talk about the preferences of the people. It's like preferences of generations. Because if you have poor education, first of all, nobody wants to be educated. Why to go to bad quality education? If you go to a good quality university, you probably would go abroad. And if you probably went abroad, you probably will not return back to Moldova. So from 3 and a bit of million of people, 1 million is living abroad. So Moldova now is kind of head office for for immigrants, that they are coming to see their parents just in Christmas time. So probably now is time to go home and to see all your enlarged family. So thank you. Like if all those like top 3 types of problems will not be approached, one, probably Moldova might not get to the point of enlargement, and the second, the enlargement might not be voted, and the third, the voting will mean slow advancement and probably will turn in little support for EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. And we'll have Darius Žiruolis, advisor to the Prime Minister of Lithuania, to introduce his remarks.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this conference. It's a luxury for me nowadays to be back on the European front, because I am deeply in domestic trenches with as I was advertised, with domestic reforms. I have 4 points to make. First, even though we are talking mostly about Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, but I mean, if for European Union now, it's a geopolitical imperative, as we heard from many speakers, to enlarge. Also, the Western Balkan front should be taken equally seriously, and within this country as well. Second, on capacity building, I think that the applicant countries, and rightly Thessaloniki was mentioned as a reference point dating back to 2003, and all these three so-called DCFTA countries, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, I mean, their experience with European integration affairs dates back to almost 20 years now. So my claim is that they know what to do. They need support, but they need a different kind of support. They have enough brain power. I mean, my experience mostly is with and about Ukraine, but I've been to Moldova and Georgia. So they have enough brain power to design and implement their accession plans. What is different and how the world for them changes since yesterday is that, okay, and perhaps it's perhaps not just one single point in time, but I sense that over next year, since it's an election year, there will be perhaps pledges on the final date or preferred date of by which the European Union will want to implement or to act upon this geopolitical imperative, let's say 2030. And through analogy to our own accession, when we were not given an exact date, when we began negotiations, the date was given only in Laeken summit in December 2001, if I remember well, so 2.5 years before enlargement actually took place. But if there is a date, it would be helpful for the domestic teams also to mobilize themselves. I remember very clearly, and our former chief negotiator was present in that meeting in around 1999 when we were invited to begin negotiations. The foreign minister gathered about 5-6 of us and asked the very exact question. Those who do not intend to stay until in the posts until the actual date of enlargement, and at the time, as I recall, we only had a technical date, sort of our own internal plan to be members by 2004. So those who don't intend to stay, please leave your posts. So if by let's assume this enlargement and the EU will do its utmost for this to happen by 2030, it's time for domestic teams to get serious. 7 years is in individual careers is something within the reach. I mean, they would be able to make this sort of commitment. In your words, rock stars should get their hands dirty. We need perhaps fewer rock stars and more working horses on the ground. So that is also almost equivalent to do its, military duty to your country, if it's for the reasons, also for the reasons of security that these countries are joining the European Union. Now, on the support side, I don't know how the issue was, or whether it was solved in Moldova at all. There were very good initiatives by the EU, although they were not called in that name, basically supporting the so-called reform staff with adequate remuneration. So if this needs to be done, I think for the European Union would not be a huge bill to foot, in the region of several $1 million, which is nothing in comparison to 50 billion now needed to finance resistance or to finance the war, and then let the countries organize themselves, because it's an internal matter, and then, it's also a sovereign decision, I would argue. And then help will be provided, well, along the way. There will be need for sure, because this EU law has also some fine points where even at the EU level expertise is not always abundant. But I mean, first we need to have this organizational framework in place, so that it is run by those countries. With Ukraine, obviously, several of speakers were mentioning that winning of the war is crucial. I mean, it naturally begs the question: how can we be sure that the fruits of reform will be sustainable? How we can be sure that that corruption will go down eventually? It will be. Again, it's in Ukraine's hands, but somehow, at least myself, I just hope that the new social contract after the war will be such that citizens will not be tolerant of political corruption and administrative dysfunction, which let's face it, was present in those countries. So that's second point. Third point, I fully support Michael Emerson. Nice to have you back in Vilnius, and thank you for raising this point on refinement of enlargement methodology. He suggested that actually that European Union or European Commission, which will be running this accession negotiations on behalf of EU and will oversee the progress of reform, should be more attentive to the national pledges of the applicant countries, of what they and letting them choose both the pace and modalities within those, technically speaking, 30 chapters. And I think that would be a welcome improvement also, because it would give more ownership in the process. I remember the times when we were negotiating about 2 words in accession partnerships, and the European Commission would not want to hear. So that's nothing. But again, back quarter of century ago, this methodology was not refined as enlargement methodology was not as refined as it is now. So we more sovereignty, more responsibility and sovereignty to the applicant countries. And the final point, I think there is a connection. We're talking about reforming of European Union institutionally, also policies, but I also think, since also, I mean, now, as I said, I am deep in the trenches of domestic reforms, there is perhaps a connection with the domestic reforms in our own countries, which is needed for a success of European Union in general, which is not depend, because Georgios was saying, okay, let's not create a tension between European citizens and Ukrainians, and let's find a compensation mechanism on the European level. But I think we should also be thinking seriously in each of our within each of our national governments and societies, how to also move ahead of times. So if we speak about this country, a serious debate and also a solution needs to be found on the issues of own national resources, not on own European resources, but on own national resources, both to compensate. We'll be phasing out after the next MFF, this multi-financial framework. We'll also see, and then we'll see very, very soon, a drop in budgetary resources because of our demographic decline. So will need more even to sustain what the level of public services that we have now. And obviously, enlargement brings in very serious issues about agricultural policy, cohesion, etc. So I would argue there is a link, and the reason why this far right is also on the move, because a national promise of improved lives, or at least not declining lives, sustainability of standards of living and public services that the citizens were enjoying so far is not adequately addressed by the national government. So I would argue that it is also a way of keeping enlargement sustainable, keeping the light of stronger union alive. I think this is it. That's the 4 issues that I wanted to bring to your attention, and I will be very happy to discuss if there is any interest.
Okay, thank you, Darius. And before we open Q&A session, the host of this event, Petras Uštrevičius, also wants to share some thoughts.
Thank you, Rasa. And replacing Raimondas Lopata, may colleagues offer you some thoughts in this regard. And congratulations, Kira, to great achievement of yesterday. Not full result, not full victory, but really a serious, very fundamentally important step forward. Looking forward, Kira, to working with you and pushing forward our joint agenda for more united Europe. Firstly, yesterday's decision marks, I would say, a very substantial change in geopolitics, as indeed having more responsibilities on Eastern Europe, what EU took after that decision, meaning EU is becoming a real geopolitical player. So we have no way out, only way forward. Now that promise must be fulfilled, okay? So we have to become more geopolitical and more efficient in all means. Secondly, it's it's an end of the Russian Empire. That was said already, that Ukraine, if it is in, Russia might become an empire. If not, it's a dying kind of third world state. Okay, so and this decision much about that. And finally, Amanda rightly said about NATO. Yes, we have to use this momentum to push forward NATO enlargement as well. I don't know what kind of the arguments NATO might have after this. It must react and must go with the decisions in July in Washington, D.C. Secondly, in fact, integration will be not just an easy path to go through. Where I see some positive things, we can really advance and open up gradually some sectors of the European Union, for example, single market. It might be a great advantage for those countries. We know how much free trade and economic cooperation means for countries' economic transformation. It's a something on which a real market economy is built on. But we have to see as well a huge lack of investments for those decisions which are taken and must be implemented, even about administrative capacity. To speak, to come up with in a public discussion, even in Moldova, that Moldovan government must increase the office of, let's say, agriculture ministry by 2/3. It will be unpopular in any case. But these investments, they have to be found and timely made in order to have this capacity, as Darius said, timelines now matters a lot. I mean, they predecide the effectiveness of integration. Indeed, some memberships have been very successful, some are less. Why does Portuguese membership didn't produce so much of results like in Spain, all right? Or even our advancement. Now Lithuania stands by 85% average of GDP. So we are already overtook Portugal. So where is the receipt of the successful integration or membership, and where is no? What is the kind of conclusion we may draw? I mean, investments into capacity, because efficient administration is half of happiness of people, okay? If they are not excessive, if they are efficient, if they know what they do not intervene into the private life of citizens, so then it's fine. It's something, a way forward. A very good example from things which haven't been noticed properly. What the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine did last week, they finally approved that very sensitive law on minorities, education, okay? Because of the Venice Commission recommendations and so on and so forth. They did it. They did it in a very far away. Results were achieved. The Hungarian community in Zakarpattia came out with a very supportive statement for the government in Kiev. They said, oh, finally we have a very solid and good understanding and so on and so forth. Orban said to that community leaders, oh, don't overjoy. Don't overjoy. Be silent a bit. You are much of support of Kiev. But, you know, that is kind of the situation we have to see as it is. Will be, of course, an attempt from those countries to intervene into the domestic affairs of Ukraine, but my point is that we have enough of proof, okay, that Ukraine does a very serious job, very competent and responsibly delivering on promises, on those criteria. But let's have a bigger picture. I mean, how things go around. I mean, how much of the kind of the dirty politics interfering and replacing those results with absolutely speculative announcements. Indeed, challenges from outside world will remain during the integration path. Mark, be sure. Once I read the statements of so-called foreign minister of Gagauzia, I am amazed. A foreign minister of Gagauzia making a statement towards the government of Moldova and demanding some, changes. I mean, some adaptations and so on and so forth. Of course, we know where that music comes from. Where is the, conductor is placed for all those, and will be enough for Moldova, in particular, hybrid and all kind of. Ukraine is facing a more substantial challenge in this regard, and will be more for Western Balkans, for sure, for sure. I'm not speaking about South Caucasus as a special place, but again, we have to follow all these things in a very kind of serious way. And indeed, I do agree with the importance of twinning and consulting. We have to provide for those countries. By the way, a week ago, we just overstepped a boundary of 28th anniversary. Lithuania applied for membership in EU. Okay, 28th we applied, 20 we are in. It's a good score. It's a good proportion, huh? I mean, in 8 years' time, I mean, to become, it's something. I'm not sure it will be repeated in case of Ukraine and Moldova, because applications are already, let me count, 15, it's like 8 years already now application for membership. But you know, in any case, I completely agree with Darius. It's about the state-building exercise. You join sooner or later, but to have a well-functioning and not excessive state administration and state functions, it's something what any state should appreciate. So that's why this state building, we have to look very committedly from our side and support Ukraine and Moldova in particular, as well talk to Western Balkan countries. They shouldn't be excluded from this. But, you know, I have a feeling that both Ukraine and Moldova might serve as a good example for Western Balkan countries. That's my personal feeling. Because I see those countries, I mean, those two countries, they have very narrow historical corridor, geopolitically speaking, okay? Western Balkans are a bit more relaxed. They are not in a hurry, and because of some politicians, national politicians in particular. But I hope we will come up with more proposals when the demand comes on this support, and I believe we will be able to demonstrate a good path of integration of those countries, jointly working on many practical projects. Thank you, Rasa.
Thank you, Petros. And now we'll have around half an hour for questions. Do we have any from the audience yet? Okay, Karen.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for interesting presentations. I have one question for Magdalena, but also for Petros and also Georgios, regarding how we should deal, and of course also, I mean, all of the panel wants to contribute, how we should deal with disinformation campaigns. Because Mark was mentioning after the Russian-supported militants in southeastern Ukraine shut down a passenger plane with Russian missile. Then there were like 200 stories about what theories there could have been out there. But we want to communicate the truth and substance, and then we send out one message, and that's the message that we send out. How are we going to deal with these misinformation campaigns, especially in a time where it's going to be more and more easy to produce not 200 different stories, but you ask generative AI, and they will produce 2,000 different stories and create even more confusion. So how are we going to invest in proper communication and good journalism to counter these things?
The best rule to fight propaganda is to produce more propaganda. You know, in propagandistic thinking, in general, propaganda is just a way of communication. It is not good or bad. It's how you communicate. You just like make an appeal to feelings, not to rational. Always Europe, West in general is perceived as a rational construct. Everything is rational, based on rationality, based on interest, on market, on the person is invited to evaluate. Eastern way of thinking is absolutely different. When you're talking to an uneducated person, you're not explaining that is more reasonable something. You make him feel that he needs that. Russia knows how to create argument based on feeling. We simply, in other way, create the message in the West. So last year I had an interesting grant. I was given, like our organization, given like a sum of money to do disinformation campaign. Well, disinformation campaign is another way to say anti-propaganda, also propaganda. But another with other message, propaganda with other message, counter message. So we tried different type of messages, different. we tried to pack the messages even in those dirty words. You know, it's like kind of to get to the bottom. Didn't work much. Tried to be impartial with the data to come. Didn't work at all. Data doesn't work. It's like to prove that this cup of tea is more expensive here and is cheaper here. Buy cheaper? No. What works? Small achievements. The person needs to feel that he has something small for himself. That's why always the granting system, all sorts of the granting system, small granting system, small achievements work. Now Maya Sandu, the President of Republic of Moldova, launched a message, a very interesting message. I was absolutely surprised. She gathered the public administrator and said, so guys, those who represent parties who do not support the European Union will not get funds from the European Union. So the budget that is coming from Moldova will distribute it equally. But the budget that is coming from European Union, guys, no. You've been voted by people who doesn't want European Union. So no money for Europe. Gosh, started massively. People like massively started to understand that those are real money. It's like until now the roads are constructed, until now the schools are built, until now the mayoralities are refurbished, like everything is refurbished. And in Gagauzia, in south of Moldova, they take the European money, but they don't want to mention that those are European money. And they are fine taking the European money. Even in Transnistria, you go, the dollar and euro works like perfectly, much better than their ruble. But no, they will not mention that those is like for enhancement of human condition. Yes, for better medicine, yes, but hey guys, you want that people here do not die of hunger, right? It is, we just like a government, we just accept that you help them not dying. This perfidic like thinking logic is absolutely working as long as Europe comes with this humanistic, very high society, high intellectual message. The message should be dropped. You will not explain a cockroach in the kitchen, hey buddy, please do not walk here. Walk here, it's discomforting. No, you just smash it. And smash 10 and the 11th doesn't cross this line because... So it's another way of communication. So propaganda should drop from this high society level to a very level of understanding of the people. They should be taught to their language. That's my point.
Kira, we noticed that you raised your hand. Yeah, please.
Well, first of all, thank all of you for your remarks. And I don't know, like, where you see me, and if you see me when I was saying yes, yes, or like, oh yes, I support you, and it was on some of the
saw fireworks as well.
Yes, yes, I don't know how it does this, but yeah, the fireworks is a good thing, yes, about NATO or nothing, and about the end of the Russian Empire. So it's like, I'm super supporting this, and I want to actually echo what Mark has said. So one of the main differences between disinformation and propaganda and the attempts to tell people the truth is that when you are telling the facts, you are appealing to the rationale. And propaganda and disinformation is usually appealing to emotion. And Ukrainian, I would say, propaganda, like that was like a central voice that we started since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, also used this matter saying, well, we will be appealing to people's emotions as well, many times, because otherwise we will lose to what Russia is saying. And I want to give you very painful example, and this example is main Russian narrative against Ukraine's accession to EU has been for probably 10 years like this, that they do not need you there. They are looking down on you as a third-class citizens, and you will always be like cleaning toilets, and you would never be considered as equal. And so when 2 years ago, I was elected as ALDE vice president, and because I'm doing so much of international work and speaking to many people, that when I'm coming back, I'm talking to our military, I'm talking to people from different constituencies, and I can tell you still the main question that they are asking me about all those countries who support us, who has taken bazillion of our refugees, who has sent us so much of the aid, and from all our TV channels, we hear about like Germany supporting us, Lithuania, Estonia supporting us, Finland supporting us, Poland supporting us. We are like Moldova is our ally, etc., etc. People are still asking you very simple questions that you have to be again answering on an emotional level. They say, so how do they treat you there when you are coming from Ukraine? When you're entering European Parliament, are they respectful or are they looking down on you? When you are shaking hands with Macron, is he respectful? Is he saying, oh, it's good that you're from Ukraine? Or is he looking at you like that you are not his equal? And this is why the stories that I have to tell and I have to explain, they are like very, very simple, and they usually are explanations of the meetings. And I say, when I enter meetings of European party leaders, we go and we hug each other. And people say, this is good. This is the respect. And this is showing that we are all together. And this is showing that probably they really want us into European Union. And again, it's very hard for me to realize and accept that this is the way, but the truth is, it is the way. And we have to appeal to people's very emotional and basic feelings, because basically what people are asking me, it is coming from a long-term Russian propaganda on saying that in European Union we will be treated as second-class citizens. And this is why at some point I just learned, and all the stories that I bring back, I'm saying, we have such a great friend from Lithuania, Petras. And here is the picture of me and Petras. And we are shaking hands in front of European flags. And then my grandmother and my grandfather saying, good, this is the respect. And we understand that there are many other arguments, but the truth is, this is how we will, because right now, basically, we are fixing things that Russia was trying to break. And by the way, when I've been to Western Balkan country, and I spoke with many people, they have the same narrative. They say, especially in Serbia, and it's going from their TV. They're saying, well, European Union is like this man who tells you that he's going to marry you, but never does. And this is the narrative that is going on and on and on, and that Russia has an influence on. So one of the tasks that we will have in fighting propaganda, that would be, of course, investing in independent journalism, supporting independent TV channels, etc., and by the way, and other means of communication. And I will tell you a quick story on that as well. We will have to remove our seductive idea of always appeal to people's brains, because we have to appeal to their hearts and find the ways that work. Another quick thing is, we have seen recently that people are very tired of the Central Marathon. So, at the very, very beginning of the full-scale invasion, we have combined all the TV channels into one that was going with the narratives and the sound bites that were approved by the government, and it was one voice policy, and people were getting all the information from there. But in 2 years, we have seen that people stopped doing that, and that they kind of created this disbelief in TV. And that most of the people right now are taking information from the internet, including Telegram channels. Some of them are anonymous and also can translate and move with Russian propaganda. So right now we do not have any solution, but I'm for that, and there are many ideas of how we are going to find it. But my call for you is when you're finding something that works well, like for us it was the TV marathon, it would not work well forever, and we should think about alternative ways of delivering information to people right away, because at some point any source would exhaust itself.
Thank you, Kira, and yeah, Georgios.
Okay, to make the discussion even more interesting, I don't think that we should invest in propaganda, because propaganda, in my view, is a short-term solution. I think we should make a combination. With Petras, we have visited Taiwan, and I also have visited Australia, and they have very complicated systems of checking the facts and immediate responding to what the Chinese are saying, who are better organized in general than the Russians. So we don't have anything similar in the European Union. I mean, everything is at the bureaucratic level. It's not at the political level of an immediate response. And I fully agree that you have to combine checking the facts, immediate responses in political terms, with giving positive examples, because people need encouragement. And I really don't think that the European Union has actually encouraged, for instance, Ukrainians, because coming from Greece, I know what it means to be under an IMF program. So Ukraine is continuously under an IMF program, and even what is being described as economic assistance by the European Union is 80% loans. And coming from Greece, of course, I understand what it means to have an increasing, let's say, increasing deficit and an increasing debt of the country state. So I think the Europeans, as Europeans, we should do our fact-checking. We should have a mechanism of responding in political terms, but not in propaganda terms. I'm good in propaganda as well, but it's the wrong weapon to use, in my view. And we have to be more constructive in our approach towards the people of Ukraine and the people of Moldova. I'm sure they will appreciate any improvement in their everyday life connected to the European Union. But we have to work on these things. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, we had some discussions in the EPC on this, and there's definitely a need to build societal resilience, which is not easy to do, but through public awareness. And this will also include doing it in education area, so in schools, universities and whatnot, integrating sort of programs that can help individuals, recognize or become more resilient to propaganda and disinformation. I mean, it's not something you can actually do immediately, but it is possible over the sort of medium term to help people recognize what is propaganda. It sounds a bit strange, I know, or disinformation. So it is possible, but it's not something that can be done with very quickly, but also sharing between different member states and other countries how they've actually tackled this. Because for example, on the issue of countering extremism, there was also this big problem of how do you counter propaganda narratives related to extremism. This was particularly the case regarding ISIS. You could compare Russian propaganda a bit to that, but I mean there are examples that you can take from different situations or different examples of past, how we've dealt with it before.
Thank you. Petras, Karin's question was also directed at you. Would you like to add something about?
I would offer another angle of this good question. you imagine what kind of impact on Russia a successful integration of Moldova and Ukraine will have. Because if you to speak to Russians presenting a good example, even the Baltic integration, they say, Polish, it's another world. Come on, we don't care. I mean, we are somehow different. I mean, we eat different bread and drink different water. But imagine good, I mean, those personal, very clear, even daily life change examples are brought to Russia. And if Russians, I mean, well, Russians still think, I mean, some of them, as Ukraine is a backyard, I mean, it's less developed, I mean, you know, somehow secondary class country. And all of a sudden, look, we gave Ukrainians and Moldovans visa-free regime. Huh? Don't you think that Russians are very jealous? Oh, it made such a wave of reactions.
Many Russians are returning to Moldova to apply for Moldovan passport.
Oh, you see?
It started.
You see? I mean, it's clear, and more. So I'm not speaking that it must become a kind of our disinformation propaganda. No, we are reporting truth and reporting facts, which is absolutely different. But let's not overestimate what kind of impact on the societal change we might have if we, and I believe we will do so, having a good and you know, well-coordinated integration of Moldova and Ukraine to European Union. So it's my strong belief. Thank you.
Darius, do you want to add something to this question? No?
Just 5 cents. I mean, I'm paid for speaking the truth to power and not to appeal to emotions, so I'm not really an expert in it. But from what we are analyzing about our own internal situations, societal situations, and perhaps it is applicable to everyone. So it's not an issue just about the Russian propaganda, but about us, actually our society is getting less cohesive because of various bubbles, also internal bubbles, past pandemic, after COVID. And perhaps the long-term answer lies within our educational systems, about ability to recognize facts, critical thinking. So what we are discussing, it's all very interesting, and I salute this innovative solution. I mean, if you don't support our EU accession, so don't apply for European money, etc. But these are sort of short terms and very inventive and innovative tricks. But the fundamental answer is within our educational system. Thank you.
We have 15 minutes left to this discussion. Do we have? Yeah, of course.
So just a few thoughts, especially like reacting to George's argument. So when we are talking about propaganda, guys, it's like not false information. A good propaganda never uses false information. It twists the truth. It just looks for the cavity in the society and digs in this cavity. So in Ukraine found a cavity between Russian speakers, Ukrainian speakers, Surjik, oh gosh, started digging this cavity. In Moldovans, we have pro-Eastern approach, pro-Western approach. Moldova is very split in terms of ethnicity. To those Gagauz, those are from Turkey group. Well, again, they started digging there. Rural, urban, this clash is also very used maybe by the propaganda. So in Moldova, in terms of let's work with informing correctly, and in Moldova it was created a center, Patriot, which is looking for the websites and the sources of false information propaganda and disclosing them. So it's working constantly on looking at the false information and on production, correct and checking news. What does it mean? It's good. It is like, obviously it is good, but we are always step behind. Somebody is producing and you are step behind, you are reacting. Doesn't have Moldova, maybe Ukraine has a bit, like with, Ukraine is very good in producing like propaganda according to the Russian standards, but Moldova is reactive in terms of, we just react to something that exists, we don't have something proactive. Like, doesn't exist like an idea of a nation. In the case of the Baltic states, is absolutely different. People are proud of to being like belonging to a nation. In Moldova, doesn't like you will not have all this. And what our colleague from Ukraine said, like always is projected that you are third-class citizen. It is really largely used, and for those nations like Moldova, it is perceived people what they feel miserable. They go to West, they feel miserable, and instead, like Russia is permanently using all this like. And what like the last argument is when you imagine a war. And you always understand that you have to supply the fighter with munition. In an information war, you always have to supply the producer of information also with munition. So if you look to Ukraine and Moldova, you almost have no sources of support for the civil society to stand against propaganda. So kind of, we have the journalists, the civil society. You have, like, with working in a full intensity, you'll not stand the wave of the information coming from the East.
Sadly, we'll not hear more examples from Ukraine because Kira said that, yeah, she had to disconnect because she has an interview, TV interview in a couple of minutes. So, yeah. We're left alone. Kyrgyz, I saw that you were writing something. Do you want to add anything more?
Following his reasoning.
Okay. So do we have any more questions? Justinas.
Thank you very much. I wanted to pick up on what Amanda said about the NATO or bust, essentially, policy, and specifically, or I guess invite a more comprehensive, maybe broader reflection on the interplay between and possible synergies between the EU accession process and NATO, specifically for a couple of reasons. One is, I think, that as far as I understand, both in the American intellectual community, but also in at least the present National Security Council, the enlargement is the theory of winning the peace, EU enlargement. And that creates both a certain hope that a speedy process of enlargement can encourage further US investment, but at the same time prove as an excuse for outsourcing. I wonder if there are any practical solutions to lock those processes in so that enlargement that we proceed with raises the probability of a US continued involvement rather than freeze their hands. And I wonder also, of course, the great unknown of the November 2024 and how that interplays here, given that whatever the enlargement process will be, will extend, well, even after 28, meaning that we will have to be speaking about this synergy, hopefully post-Trump, if that happens. So this is, I guess, picking back off your question, but it's also aimed at anybody else on the panel.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, to put it very simply, I mean, of course, the United States sees Ukraine's integration into the EU as a positive step in terms of security and the, let's say, the defeat of Russia. But at the end of the day, at least in my opinion, the United States is still afraid of the Russians. I mean, this is the core of the problem. Despite everything that's happened, despite the magnificent resistance of Ukraine, they still have this thing in the back of their head which makes them believe that they should be afraid of the Russians. They still have this concern about, you know, the Russians using the nuclear option. And this is the main barrier, at least in my opinion, for the United States to really get on board with Ukraine's NATO accession process. Whether that would change in the event there was a full defeat of Russia in Ukraine, one would hope that it would, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But for me, this is what it's going to take for the United States to step up and support Ukraine's NATO membership. But that's just my opinion. You know, there's others in this room who are probably better informed on the US within NATO, but I don't see them being ready to change their position anytime soon. But still, we should try.
Do anyone from other panelists want to add up?
You know, what I like, I mean, time-wise, that the European Union took first decision to invite Ukraine and Moldova, although Moldova didn't apply for membership in NATO yet. Yes, Mark, if I'm correct. So there is no final decision. Yeah, but what comes to Ukraine, so we made first, and probably it's a good signal that we are ready, I mean, to take some responsibilities, geopolitical responsibilities, and not looking back through the shoulder to transatlantic partners. It might inspire them. I don't know. But I'm maybe more optimistic looking at US. They want to be a leading power, so they can't be a leading power alone. They need partners. And, you know, looking from the time perspective, Ukraine will be a key state in this region, pre-decided security issues. So that's why it's better to be a friend if he's such a key player rather than a neutral, you know, and kind of strong in words and weak in action kind of partner. So that's why I think it could work, but we have the right historical record. That's for sure.
Well, I read with great interest analysis about, you know, whether Trump will be re-elected and what he's going to do, etc. I have reached a conclusion, without being an expert on the issue, that the Americans, even if Trump is re-elected, are not going to, let's say, forget their responsibilities towards Europe, because it has to do with their own interests. But of course, we should not avoid our responsibilities, because let's say for a lot of years we had reduced defense expenditure, and I'm not quite sure whether we have learned a lesson. Because, for instance, I read in the international press that Germans are not moving forward with this ambitious program they have to increase their defense expenditure as fast as they should. The other example that I have, which is characteristic of the European way of thinking, which I believe is wrong, is that, of course, the Americans approve it. From what I read, Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, will become the next Secretary General of NATO. I have to tell you that I consider Rutte a very able politician, liberal politician, but I don't think he is the correct person to lead NATO, because during Rutte's years, defense expenditure in the Netherlands was 1% of GDP. Rutte had the Merkel mentality, even worse in my view. And now the Netherlands have increased their defense expenditure to 1.5% of GDP. But if you want to argue with Trump, who claims rightfully, of course, he has the wrong strategy, but his reasoning is not is based on facts. The Europeans are not doing their best, in contributing to the defense of the West. This is obvious in my view. So the best thing to, let's say, to make the Americans continue assuming the responsibility, because I think Biden is doing an excellent job, despite the fact that in political terms he cannot sell it in the United States, is that we are, let's say, we do our share. This is my view. And we have to send positive messages, because this mentality of, let's say, the thrifty, the frugal, etc., has nothing to do with geopolitics.
Can I just say something? I don't doubt that the United States is still ready to defend its NATO allies. What I was trying to say is that I don't think that the United States is in any way ready to take Ukraine into NATO. That was the first point. And the second point, that I would like to make about the US elections is that we've known for like 2-3 years there was a chance that Donald Trump may come back, which would have repercussions for European security. But since then, as far as I'm aware, but maybe I'm wrong, very little has actually been done to address this possibility. And I mean, up until yesterday, there was even some conversation about the United States pulling out of NATO. We know that's not going to happen now because they passed legislation in the US. But I mean, there's no roadmap, no strategy of any sort for that eventuality, or for a decrease of US support, which to me is a seriously short-sighted approach, and is not at all serious. But hopefully this will be, addressed in the coming months and year, if I might say so.
No, I think the discussion about NATO contributions and the Trump demands of European countries to step up is an interesting exercise also in communicating facts and communicating emotions, because you could also play the devil's advocate and say there are some NATO member states that are using a lot of military funds for defending themselves against another NATO member state. Or the US military funds are being spent on healthcare and pensions and housing and things that is paid by the welfare state in our countries. So it's also a way of how do you calculate the contributions to NATO? You could also start talking about, well, which country has been in most active duty? Which has taken part in missions? Who's actually effectively taking part, not just how much of your budget is you spending on nonsense costs. And that's why I think it's important to communicate with emotions and not only with facts, because it's about how you twist the facts to your narrative.
Okay, so our time is up, and we have to wrap up this panel. I would like to thank all the panelists and the audience, Justinas and Karin, who asked the questions, and maybe the host will say some words. Thank you.
Thank you, Rasa. Let me thank you all on behalf of Renew Europe, those present here, to thank you for presence, for interesting sharing of different ideas, different perspectives. So Renew Europe is very open and progressive political group. We we sometimes disagree among ourselves, but we discuss. And we try to find the best possible compromise and our common position. So that's our way forward. So that's why we organize series of these events Europe around. This is the 4th event okay, will be 9th. Yeah, 9th event, different titles, different speakers, but always a goodwill to communicate and to exchange views. May I ask everybody really to enjoy still coffee after this meeting as a networking attempt, and I thank you much, my colleagues Karen and Georgios, who came to snowy Vilnius in spite of freezing temperatures. I know how much for Greeks it's a challenge.
We want a change in our life.
I see. Then you have a change. Then you do. And I do thank Michael, I thank you Amanda and Mark. I thank you, our moderators, Justinas and Rasa, for excellent job you did. And I thank you once again, all participants. Look, enlargement remains to be an important issue. Lithuania is not stepping out from its support towards this policy. We know from our own experience how much we gained, and we are ready to share, and we are ready to assist others, who are seriously committed on their way to integration. Thank you, and enjoy your time.